work with like all the audio and stuff. So whatever, I'll be recording it through Google Meet. So if everything explodes, it's still okay because I'll still have a Google Meet going. So you can always stop the stream.
Stream kicked in and now I can hear everything twice. There we go. Muted.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, it's gonna be a little weird with me showing up twice, but it's also because I'll be like switching to the workshop on my screen and all that when I'm doing the sharing. And so how it's probably gonna work is the Google Meet recording is going to be the thing that goes up on the Buddies of Budgie YouTube channel, and then the thing that goes up on like my YouTube channel will be like the Twitch stream. So all this pre-show stuff, I guess, as well. Yes, I don't know when Eben Yeager's gonna join, so perfect timing. All right, welcome, Eben Yeager.
Hello.
Hello. I don't know. Is this the first time I've actually even spoken to you in voice? Or...
I believe it is.
Wow, crazy! What a world we live in. All right. Well then, let's get started in a moment. I'm gonna go ahead and let me find the button for it. I'm going to start recording. And it takes a second for it to trigger, so. All right, so we are now recording the first workshop for Buddies of Budgie. So it's day one.
Everybody can start swearing now. There we go.
yeah, exactly. So you can start swearing and using all the worst language possible. So in this discussion, we're going to be primarily focused, or this workshop, on organization structure and code of conduct and consensus, and brainstorming ideas on what services we're going to be using day to day to organize our thoughts and organize development items and so on. So it might be a bit scatterbrained as we jump between things, but it'll at least give us a clear idea on what we want to do moving forward, and as always, exercise some form of transparency. So let's go ahead and get started with introductions. I'm gonna go ahead and get started because I'm already blabbering on. So my name is Joshua Strobel. I am, I guess, quote unquote, lead of, or BDFL, Buddies of Budgie. I'm the one that was like leaving Solus and was like, this is my thing, I'm taking this with me. And I've been working on Budgie for I don't know how many years. I want to say it's been 5 or 6 years that I've been at least contributing in some form to it. And I'm also the person that's trying to get all of us together in some kumbaya and actually make sure that Budgie Desktop moving forward is being developed with equal partnership amongst everybody. So yeah, let's go ahead and I'm gonna pick David in my top left corner. So if you wanna introduce yourself.
You're the top left of me. There we go. My name is David Mohammed. I'm the team lead of Ubuntu Budgie. My day job, my paying job is I'm a technical architect for a conglomerate called Fujitsu. And I sort of work on huge systems, worldwide systems, with sort of dozens and dozens of people that work with me to produce all sort of stuff. I've been working with Ubuntu Budgie since 1604, so that's 6 years now.
Wow.
And in terms of open source stuff, I've been working with Ubuntu since 804, so that makes it about 14 years now. So there we go.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. Yeah, I mean, Ubuntu 8.04 was the first thing that I had actually used, so I would say it was one of the perfect releases of Ubuntu. So yeah, all right, Sarah Bit, aka Campbell Jones, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm it's I might as well say this now. It's pronounced Searbit, but basically everyone has mispronounced it. Everyone that I've met except like one person, so I'm not super pressed on it. My actual name is Campbell Jones. I'm a student at UMBC studying computer science. I started with Budgie when I first installed Solus after someone suggested it in like 2017 when I said that I was using Mint, and I, thought, well, whatever. I guess I'll install it. Fell in love with it. Fell in love with Budgie, and after Budgie split from Solus, I decided that I would go with the dad, and stayed working on it. And right now, I'm mostly working on theming and trays and applets and stuff.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
All right, Julian, do you want to introduce yourself? I'm not going to dare say your last name, but please actually say it so I know how to pronounce it. But, it has to be the typical American that would butcher it. So, yeah.
So I'm Julien Guillot, pronounced with my magnificent French accent. So I've started using Linux with Solus, actually, or not, because I started with Fedora shortly, then gone to Mate and that kind of stuff. And I hated it, basically, so I switched to Solus very quickly. And now, I'm just without FixOS because I'm switching basically every week. So I'm an occasional contributor to Budgie. I think I did a 3 or 4 contribution in the main tree at this time. And when my brain wants to do it, I try to work on the econ task list as well as the simple task list. But yeah, this day my brain doesn't want to do that.
Yeah, that's all right. I mean, we're all contributing when we can, how we can. So the most important thing is to actually provide a place where we all can contribute. So, yeah, Marcus, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So my name is Marcus Meller. I'm a test engineer. I'm working. I don't usually like to disclose my employer, so we'll leave that out of it. But right now I'm working on doing a sort of a revamp of the Plata theme and trying to make
Very
that
cool.
work a little bit better with some of the more recent stuff that's come into Solus and the Budgie.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at.
Yeah, especially with all the GDK4 craziness and the Bitwada and that sort of stuff. It's nice, Sarah. But I just noticed that you had the button pin. Yeah, I have some stashed away too. All right, Evan Yeager, aka Evan. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. My name is Evan Maddock. I've been with Solus since 2018, 2019, I think. And I believe the first contribution to Budgie I made also involved notifications. And as some of you may know, I recently redid the whole notification thing again. So
Yeah.
apparently I like notifications. But I'm a contributor both Solus and Budgie, and here we are.
Yeah. All right. Well, let us go ahead and get started. So just to make sure, did you all get access to the Miro board through the sharing, and you were able to actually open that up and access it? Or okay, cool. I just want to make sure because I had signed up early for some sort of like consultant version of Miro in order to actually do any of that. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and present my tab here. I don't know how many of us are actually going to make use of it, of course, but I am going to then switch so everybody on the stream can see it, and I will go ahead and try to zoom in, do my best there. So going through it, we have our day one to do up in the top left hand corner. Just to provide a little bird's eye view, we have sort of on the right of that, we have an org to do, so things to do after the workshop. And then just to make sure that we sort of stay on topic in terms of what this workshop is about, I also have this description here describing the day 2 stuff for like Budgie 10 and Budgie 11. So we know to try to stay on topic for what this workshop is about, and we could always make sure that the stuff, the technical discussions are able to be had more related to the second workshop. So and obviously it's this this workshop is time gated to 3 hours. So the idea is it will take no more than 3 hours, but it could take any shorter amount of time than that. But of course, we want to be respectful for everybody's time. And of course, it being, I don't know about the who celebrates like Vappu and like May Day and that sort of stuff across the world. But here we have that as a holiday tomorrow, and just trying to be cognizant of people's times and all that. So anyways, below this we have core values. So this is the idea is we will have some sticky notes that you could copy pasta, and you could drag them to this ideas pool and double click and start writing your ideas for, you know, what you think should be important in terms of the organization, and how we should develop Budgie, and how we should come to consensus and all that. And then of course on the right of that is the actual consensus creation. So we have this ideas pool, and then, you know, we have a discussion around these ideas. We group them up. We vote on, you know, what sort of ideas we like the most, and we move them to the agreed area when we, well, agree on them. So below that we have code of conduct. So what I went ahead and did was I linked a view only thing as well. I tried to do this whole embed thing with the code of conduct, but it doesn't quite work with Miro all that well. So I went ahead and linked it, so you'll be able to open that up. And just as a side note, this is the code of conduct that I had originally written to replace the community guidelines with Solus, but it was never something that was enacted. And I felt that there was a lot of strong aspects of this code of conduct. Of course, I'm biased because I wrote it, that we could potentially use for Buddies of Budgie. But there's some aspects of it, like a code of conduct committee, that might not be necessary because the size of the team is going to be much larger and more distributed. So things might be able to be handled that way. But we're going to have a discussion on all the various points regarding that, and also use these sort of sticky notes to write, you know, what have we not covered? What are some improvements that need to be made, maybe to the language? And if anybody has any concerns, of course, we should hear about those and have a discussion around it, and see what sort of refinements should be made. And if we need to have any more workshops about it, then we can do that too. And then, of course, clear on the right of that, we have this organization structure. So the idea behind here is defining sort of these micro teams within the organization that have certain responsibilities. And this I have listed twice here, but the idea is we have like a dedicated team. So we have tasks up here, and then below we have like these teams or individuals that are responsible for these tasks or responsibilities. So yeah, so for instance, with a packaging task, we would have a packaging and distribution team. And with, like, say, billing as an example, that's something, of course, I'm willing to do and make sure that we're able to handle that through Open Collective and that sort of thing. And then how do we facilitate discussions, and what sort of avenues should we utilize for facilitating discussions, whether that's GitHub, whether that's forums or mailing lists or what have you. And then on the right-hand side of that is service ideas and resource access. So, you know, what are we using in terms of resources or services, and why are we using them? And then, you know, topics that we should cover. And of course, these aren't the only topics we should cover, but the idea is we have these sticky notes and you write things that we should cover, and then we discuss and we find services or software, whether open source or not, you know, just trying to find the best tool for the job. And then we break it down into the advantages and disadvantages, try to come up with some sort of consensus, and then we figure out how we handle the resource access as well, because I don't want to be the only one that has access to, you know, these sorts of resources. That isn't fair. Like, you know, as a couple of examples, like if you guys need to kick me out of the team, right? Just be realistic. If you guys need to like kick me out of the team, then of course that is something that you guys need to make sure you have the ability to do, and also are able to continue working on the project after that. Or, you know, if I get like hit by a bus or something. So like we need to figure out all that stuff, or, you know, maybe I'm sick and somebody needs to fix something on the Kubernetes cluster or whatever. Like these sorts of things we should factor in. And and come to some sort of consensus about? And then how do we organize all this information in a way that is up in front to the user, to the team? We have like information for like the website, transparent roadmaps, and we could cover some of this in the second workshop as well, related to Budgie 10 and Budgie 11, and how we communicate this data through like documentation centers and about pages and so on and so forth. So that way people are really able to get an idea about what Buddies of Budgie is, what the Budgie desktop is, who is in charge of what. So they're able to really come to a determination that if they have a specific issue, like as an example, a packaging issue with a particular operating system, who they need to get in contact with or what team they need to get in contact with. So that's sort of the premise behind this board. So, and then that in theory is the end of the workshop. So yeah, does anybody have any questions?
No, just to say that's it's particularly ambitious, but let's plow on. Let's see if we can crack this.
Yeah, yes, it's very ambitious, and of course it's okay if we don't cover all of it, because day 1 workshop and day 2 workshop aren't necessarily the only workshops we will ever have. I would kind of like to have this sort of be a thing that we are not afraid to regularly do or schedule when we feel it's necessary. So. All right, so the first thing that we need to work on is sort of identifying and documenting the core values of the Buddies of Budgie organization. So these are the things that are really the most important to us as individuals, and sort of determining, okay, are there a set, maybe 4 or 5 core values that we feel really are going to be a guiding principle for how we operate as an organization and how we take Budgie going forward. So with that, I went ahead and moved the item to our in progress, and we have this ideas pool below. So you could choose any color. I went ahead and chose this tan color. Actually, I should be able to bring people to me. Oh, okay, perfect. I enabled that. So yep. All right. So you're over here. So you're welcome to go ahead and like copy and paste one of these as an example, and put something in the ideas pool. So I already had one that's agreed, but I'll go ahead and move it back for just the sake of discussion regarding transparency. And for me, the reason why I made this card is because I come from an organization in the past that wasn't entirely transparent, and this was a lesson learned that I found particularly valuable, which was be more transparent. So that's one of mine. But if you have ideas, of course, copy paste a sticky note, move it over to here, and type it. So yeah, and let me know if you don't have editing access as well, and I should be able to fix that. Oh, looks like somebody is moving the.
Someone's moved core values.
Somebody's moved core values.
Put it back.
I'm gonna. There we go. Fix that and make sure. Let's see.
That would be me.
It's okay.
I was trying to move this
Yeah. You
screen
can.
around.
Yeah, you can move with pressing and holding right click. I went ahead and locked the object though, so hopefully. Yeah. Miro's a very interesting tool.
I'll stick with scroll bars. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, the nice thing about this is it's kind of like infinite scrolling and zooming. So you could have like something with very tiny text, and then you could just use the scroll bar to zoom in and get a closer look at something. So unfortunately, I really tried hard to find any sort of open source software that would remotely hold a candle to this, and unfortunately there just isn't anything. So you know, if there's any intrepid web developers out there that want a challenge, this is yours. So, okay.
Okay, there's a way to lock certain elements of the view.
Yeah, so if you click on an object, there's a padlock. So I'll go ahead and lock that. So
yeah,
that
people
should be
don't
locked.
accidentally move it. Again.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and spend time doing that while you guys think about ideas. Do this on some of them. I will note this for day 2. Like that's locked already. Yeah, so far we have some really good ones.
Right. Can I suggest that whilst this is the sort of thing that as we go through on sort of discussion ideas, things will sort of trigger in the back of your minds, and sort of so if we all I'll suggest add things as and when things sort of come to mind, and then we can sort of come back to this particular part as well once we've made some
Yeah, of
progress.
course. Yeah, we could always return to certain things. My idea was we write down some things and we describe our internal thinking and thought process for certain cards. Yeah, we could always fill this in as well as we go. So
yeah.
So we have some here that are good, but might be more related to Budgie itself rather than the core values of the organization, which are good. Like for example, like this toolkit and application agnostic is certainly important, and the explicit, customizable, and themable ones. Of course, these are like good items for like say Budgie 10 and Budgie 11 and Budgie desktop moving forward, but for example, like some of these like open to changes, you know, is a good one in the case of like promoting the ability to make changes within the organization, or of course it could apply to Budgie, but open and welcoming community is a good one, and so on. But
I think that my intention with, I couldn't figure out how to word this, but my intention with toolkit and application agnostic was sort of the same thing with no preferred downstream, where we're not sort of selecting a certain set of applications or a certain set of toolkits that we focus on and that we only support. Wherein my intention was like we should try to support all user use cases if we can.
Yeah.
So not like say, you know, you're having a theming issue with the Qt application. We don't support that. Get out of here.
Yeah. So how do you look at that from the perspective of like an organization? Of course, I guess it like it would be like no, in a way it's like no playing favorites, right? Like no preferred downstream. Like
that's pretty much, yeah. That's a better way to word both of my first two.
I mean, of course, like yeah. But like, is there like a more concrete way that we could really describe that? Does anybody have any ideas in terms of that would be better to like communicate to the outside world? Of course, we could come back to the granularity of the language, but if like these broader ideas are something that's important to us, then we could just put them in agreed, and then move forward and refine the language as we determine how we want to document this. Lucy in chat, which is like their actual name in my Twitch chat, says workflow agnostic, respects user freedom, which I think are good ones in terms of Budgie desktop as well. But there's certainly a lot of intersection between Buddies of Budgie and Budgie desktop in terms of what the core values are. So I think it'll be a bit tricky in terms of figuring out what our values are as an organization.
Yeah, the split between it's always been for open source projects for me is that the organization has always basically just been
right
the application or the desktop.
Yeah, but if we look at it from the perspective of like KD and GNOME, right? Like yes, they develop like desktop environments and they develop applications, but to them, what are the values that they try to communicate and utilize sort of as their like modus operandi for day-to-day activity of like, okay, like or like thinking in terms of the mindset of every individual contributor. Like for example, if somebody wants to contribute to Buddies of Budgie, I would expect them to go through and make sure that they are doing things in a manner that's transparent, right? Because if we're just to say like, oh, I've suddenly done X, Y, and Z, like I have I've submitted a pull request for a certain feature and that feature hasn't even been discussed with anybody, then that's not really being transparent. It's sort of avoiding having a conversation about certain matters. It's another example. Or as if I was to like make changes to like Open Collective or something without a discussion, that's not really fostering a sense of transparency and communication, like this good multi-channel communication and collaboration. So
okay, so what I was just doing is I did a quick Google just to see where GNOME is coming from, and just looking at the foundation board stuff. And you can play around with the words, but I think you can take an awful lot of open source projects are similar. It's just the wording that they use. So we can borrow or reword or whatever we like that. So in terms of core values, they start off with saying open and public. That's just natural. A core value is that we produce what's termed free software. I think you just need to understand what the definition of free software is.
right.
More controversial, GNOME is a meritocracy. That's an interesting one. Is Buddies of Budgie meritocracy, or was it something slightly different? Something to think about there. That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
And
I don't know if I'd want us to be a meritocracy.
Well, and also in that line of thinking, I can't say I entirely agree that GNOME is necessarily a meritocracy either. Yeah.
Now is the time where I take your words that you said before the stream and take them to heart, i.e., not go on a very long and charged rant about GNOME.
Yeah. I mean, and of course, it's worth considering, like, and we could discuss, like, in a constructive and respectful manner, issues that we might have with these sort of organizations, why we have those sorts of issues, and how we think we could do things differently. That's certainly an interesting way that we could operate. But was there any other items, David, that
It talks about are we intending to be connected with another organization, or are we completely independent? So
Mhm.
what's our view in terms of independence, if you want to use a phrase of that? Or what about influences from outside organizations and corporations?
Right. Well, I think independent is a really good one in the context of Buddies of Budgie and Budgie itself. And I think that's actually, in a way, a good way of phrasing no playing favorites, right? Is being independent means we're not having any sort of influence necessarily, or I would say any negative influence in some ways by certain organizations or consumers of Budgie. Which maybe this is just my way of thinking, but I don't actually like at this point the terminology of downstreams, especially when quote unquote those traditionally downstreams, for example, say like yourself, David, with Ubuntu Budgie, you're now front and center in the development of Budgie Desktop itself. So you're not really a downstream in the sense that
we're a client, aren't we? We
a client, a stakeholder,
yeah,
like that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's better that way.
Yeah. So would
in terms of other core values, potentially is they talk about sort of the level of the so-called bureaucracy over there. Do we go for, in terms of a light touch way of doing stuff? That's an interesting way of thinking about it, a particular project there, where or do we have a really pinned down overarching thing that we all have to adhere to? That could be could be construed as a little stifling if you want to go down that route.
Well, and I think what's so great about this is it actually touches on some of our other discussions that we'll have, like regarding code of conduct and regarding like consensus creation, right? And also how we facilitate discussions, because this informs how we are going to operate as an organization, and how we reach these sort of decisions. And in a way, we're kind of having consensus creation right now by virtue of just discussing these things. But maybe trying to figure out a more structured approach for that would be good. And I'm not like proposing some sort of like, voting mechanism like I think Debian has as an example, where you have a set of people and a certain amount of votes or whatever. But I mean, that's certainly something we could discuss. But that's not like what I'm proposing we do. But
that comes to the sort of light touch idea in many ways. Whereas if you go down towards a real formal foundation type route, or as you say, Debian elected officials and that sort of
exactly
stuff, yeah. So me personally, I like sort of a light touch idea. Everybody tries to get along as it's just a question of how we resolve disputes, even if it reaches that level.
Exactly.
If you're going for a light touch idea, then hopefully it's a bit more sort of collegiate way of working.
Yeah, and if we come to a determination, and this is something I really touched on a lot with my code of conduct that I wrote, and it's not necessarily the thing that we have to adopt. It's just it's a proposal that we could consider. Is this approach of ensuring constructive discussions on things and promoting this idea of being open to discussions and open to changes, as somebody wrote here. So but I mean, we don't have to agree on anything at the moment, but if anybody has any ideas, we could go ahead and write those down and maybe go over our current ideas and then move forward.
The number of core values should be quite small, so we've got quite a few there, but it should be tight in many ways. So.
This is exactly why I kind of have this grid of like 4 as an example, and it doesn't have to be 4, but I figured 4 is a nice number that's quite succinct and easy for people to grasp as a mindset. But we don't really have to necessarily have 4. But
I don't know. I don't know if I said open to feedback, and I think Evan said open to changes. I think that was Evan. But I kind of would want to go a step further and say that we should actively solicit feedback if we're unsure about something, not put it on the part of the user to come to us. We should go to them and say, what do you think about this? How do you think we should change things? Do you think this is a good idea or not? I don't know how to word that, but
I think that's actually, I like the approach you're proposing, because if we take a look at GNOME as an example, and the approach that they did to design, it wasn't entirely clear when they were soliciting feedback, if they ever really were soliciting feedback for example, design changes, or when it came to proposals for, you know, quite substantial changes in terms of the toolkit or libraries, and you know, that sort of like nuanced technical discussions. But was it ever them really soliciting this sort of feedback and discussion, or was it them making these sort of decisions sort of in backroom discussions in a way, you know? So I like the idea of actively trying to solicit feedback, and this is something that we really should consider.
You've got 4 key core values immediately staring it right at you. So you've got the independence, collaborative, you're open to changes, and user-centric.
Exactly.
Those are really are sort of staring it right you in the face.
Yep.
There. Yeah. Others there, what you've got down there are sort of derived elements of those aspects.
Yes. Yeah, because I feel like transparency is just, I mean, we could all say that it's a good idea, but actually acting on it is an entirely different thing, and making sure that whatever we do is with transparency in mind and openness.
Transparency is part of open to changes in many ways. It's the way you look at it.
Yeah. So would everybody agree? I mean, dumb question, but would everybody agree that transparency is a good thing that should be a fundamental part of our core values, and maybe like transparency / open to like feedback and changes sort of thing, and the language of this could
it can evolve. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Transparency can be a double-edged sword, so you got to be quite careful on the word.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I certainly have had lessons that I've taken from the past where, you know, things haven't been entirely transparent, and it's been hard to sort of figure out from an outsider's perspective, or somebody that's not, you know, in the trenches in the community and in development channels on a day-to-day basis, what is currently happening in regards to an open source project. So I feel like being able to promote transparency within the organization and external is really important. So
I would just like to jump in from the Twitch chat where Win8Linux asks, is it okay for a non-regular Budgie user like me to chip in and give some feedback?
Yes. Actually, let me go ahead and do something a little crazy. But all I ask is that if you do join, that you please be kind and respectful and not absolutely destroy this board. So.
Oh boy.
More than we already will.
Yeah. So what I'm gonna do is I am copying the link and I'm posting in Twitch chat. So.
I wouldn't make a habit of this.
Hence why I said transparency and open to feedback and changes.
It could be
make all the changes you want.
Yes. But at least you're empowered to make these changes. Okay, so can I move this over to the agreed pool?
Yeah, go for it.
Yep.
All right. So independent. I mean, I think we all we've had a discussion on this one. We know what it's like when a particular operating system is the thing that is leading the charge in terms of development, and by leading the charge, you could also choose other language to describe that.
Yeah.
But I'll just say that obviously things being independent would certainly be better, because it ensures that there is equal partnership and closer collaboration between all the stakeholders and consumers of Budgie. And this, of course, goes into like the open to changes as well. But
so if you look at the wording here, I'll read out but subtly change it. It's saying Buddies of Budgie must act in the interests of the organization, independent of influence from outside organizations and corporations. No single entity should have the ability to direct Buddies of Budgie to its own ends. That's sort of the wording you can think of there.
Yeah. Somebody in my Twitch chat had said, open to changes sometimes is not a good thing. There's always someone that wants to change something, and that open, endless loop, open to suggestions, implies we listen and we make decisions. Sorry, I don't know how better to explain my thoughts.
I think the idea is that, I mean, we're not. I think the idea of soliciting feedback in general isn't necessarily to immediately take the point of whoever's giving the feedback. I think it's to try and enlighten us as to what the people who use Budgie and the wider community actually want to see.
Yes.
Even if someone has a really awful idea, like removing the system tray entirely, it's not like we're going to listen to that and say, okay, well, someone wants it, so we're going to do it. It's thinking about, okay, so this person wants to be able to use Budgie without a system tray, so how can we maybe accommodate that use case if more people come forward with that sort of
exactly
idea.
Yeah.
I think the definition is that there is no bad idea. Yeah, it may not be a good idea, but it's no bad idea.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's an idea.
And like you had said, that it just provides us the opportunity to get a wider spectrum of ideas and allow us the opportunity, at the very least, to incorporate their thoughts into how we want to develop some sort of consensus on a given decision. Or, we might not have some sort of consideration that they come forward with. For example, like accessibility, obviously I'm quite fortunate to not have any sort of impairments, whether that's visual or auditory impairments, as an example. So for me, Budgie as it is is perfectly functional. But of course, you could make the argument from an accessibility standpoint that stuff like high contrast needs to be improved, and keyboard accessibility needs to be improved. And these are the sorts of ideas that would come from the community, even sometimes where we're not necessarily soliciting that feedback. But without getting too much in the weeds, I think independent is a good one probably to have in the agreed core values. Would we all say that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So open to changes. That sort of is part of the transparency.
Yes, the first one.
So, and actually, well, these are kind of part of the same, but I won't move them over, but it'll be good for grouping in the future. Yeah, so what would we say is our third value? So probably user-centric, right?
I would agree with that.
And,
I would think user-centric.
and how do we really quantify and describe being user-centric? And like what's us being antithetical to the user? Like how would we not be user-centric, as an example?
The original idea I had when writing that was that we don't want to, and I'm not going to be specific, but we don't want to emulate what certain organization did to their user, like introducing breaking changes that actually break workflow. At the end of the day, we are trying to build a product that serve users, and not only our vision that might be good for us, but actually not being adapted to what users want. So we need to keep in mind that we have users, and we should always try to do what's good for them instead of what we want to do.
You could, rather than use the word users, you can use things like consumers and stuff like that, rather than, because users tends to mean sort of an us v them. That's not part of the collaborative part.
That's exactly the kind of language I wanted to move away from in terms of downstreams as well, because downstreams you almost think of as like a parasitic relationship in some cases, or at least some organizations might consider it that way. Whereas I try to look at it from the perspective of we have shareholders that, and not shareholders in the context, of course, of like
stakeholders is
yeah,
a
yeah,
phrase
stakeholders
that.
is a, yeah.
And I think the idea we're trying to get across there is that users are stakeholders, right?
Yeah.
And we want to be focused on meeting the needs of all of our stakeholders.
I think that actually is a really good way of phrasing it. Users are stakeholders. Yes, completely agree with that. So would we agree that this is that we're user-centric? I know.
That could fall under the first one to a degree. Because user-centric and users are stakeholders, it kind of implies being open to feedback and changes to some degree. So I'm wondering if it should fall under that.
Well, so you could also make the argument like from the perspective of like if you're a traditional company doing product development, right? You might be open to feedback and changes in the sense that you know, you want to solicit that to improve your product or service, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the user should have a direct line of communication and direct involvement with, say, the product development, right?
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't thinking about it that way. Then yeah, I would agree with that.
This is where my software development and consultancy world stuff comes in handy. Consider differing user needs or capabilities. That is a good one. And I feel like that is definitely something that needs to be considered for development. Is certainly the differing needs. For example, desktop icons. Not a controversial topic whatsoever, but
Nope.
or system trays, right?
I mean, I think that's kind of a core thing that I want Budgie to acknowledge, is that not everyone uses, like using desktop icons as an example, not everyone uses desktop icons. Not everyone even likes desktop icons.
Yeah.
But
or
there's
not
no
everybody
good
uses
reason.
system trays.
Yeah, but there's no good reason to remove them if there's a class of users that does.
Yeah, that relies on it for their day-to-day use. Yeah.
Exactly.
But let's not get too down into the weeds, right?
No,
Yeah. But yeah, I think considerate of differing user needs or capabilities would kind of fall into user-centric, because we would have that sort of process of listening to people and acknowledging that I really hate the term stakeholders for personal reasons, but stakeholders have different needs and capabilities that we need to acknowledge and take care of if we want to make our desktop accessible to everyone.
Yeah.
One theme that's coming up is just accessibility in general. I think that might be something we need to throw on here. So let me write that down.
From a core value, what are we trying to target? Is in many ways, because we've mentioned the word desktop there in many ways. That is part of our. Is that part of our core value? Or are we?
And that's a great question, because the way I approach Budgie, well, actually, so. I think this is actually worth having a discussion in terms of the differences between Budgie 10 and Budgie 11. You know, in tomorrow's workshop is, obviously Budgie 10 is certainly desktop centric, but going forward with Budgie 11, I mean, I'm not going to imply that we're going to be developing a mobile version of Budgie. However, that being said, the way we are going to be developing Budgie in theory with Budgie 11. And of course, we should have a discussion around this, is a more separation between the data and presentation layer. And without getting too much in the weeds, it's like, okay, are we just providing a platform of this sort of common technology and a presentation layer for the desktop, and then allowing others to build on top of this Budgie data layer as a platform? Like, how are we approaching this, or are we only focused on the desktop and even how we design Budgie on a day-to-day life is sort of centered around that metaphor for usage. What's everyone's thoughts?
So from a core value perspective, I believe that what we should be concentrating on is the traditional desktop, whatever that you wish to make that mean to you.
Yeah.
Whereas other form factors, yeah, they may be interesting, but you've got bigger and better organizations that are more focused on that.
Yeah.
You could argue is falling into that area right at this moment. So from a core value perspective, I was dare to suggest that looking at the desktop and developing it from that angle is part of our vision, as it were.
So could you say that, you know, just how we have this user-centric card?
Well, user-centric can mean many things.
Right. Well, but what I mean is like like from the language of user-centric, we also apply that to like desktop-centric, right? Where like that's our primary focus, and that is like when we're making decisions and coming up with a consensus, it's built around this idea that we are going to be using and applying, you know, our technologies for the desktop, but that doesn't mean that we wholeheartedly reject the possibility of working with others that might want to apply that technology elsewhere. Or like, I guess that's the real question, is how do we actually want to operate and think about that from an org?
I think the old simplicity and elegance of a traditional desktop is that I will keep coming back to.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's something we can come back to as a fourth one, and not stay like stuck on that particular one. I think user-centric is probably a good one for the third core value. Would everybody say?
Yeah, I'd agree.
Let's go ahead and move this over to the agreed, and we could always like circle back to these ideas, but let's go ahead and move forward to consensus creation. And because as we go through more of these topics, you know, we'll get a better idea, possibly, as well as workshop 2 of what we would want our fourth core value to be. So the idea behind this consensus creation is, of course, you know, how do we propose ideas? How do we, for example, like vote on them, like with these little like sticker things? We'll build a copy pasta and move them and so on. So the idea is like we have, say we have like 3 cards or 3 sticky notes. Oh, I didn't mean to do that one, but we have like 3 sticky notes related to a certain idea, right? And we're like, oh, okay, this idea of creating consensus is a really good idea, so I'm gonna vote on that one. And you have like 4 votes in total, and so on. But it's just an idea of working like of how we could work going forward. So I guess for my first card, personally, I'm gonna write voting question mark. So let me go ahead and I'll choose a different color. Be a bit hard to see.
I suspect that largely consensus will come down to voting. I think the real question is, how do we determine A, who votes, and B, how much do those votes count? So for say ranked voting, because we have to remember we're not a huge organization like GNOME or KDE or Debian. So there's scale to consider as well.
So if you consider that we've got a core membership at the moment.
That was me.
And if you go back to the idea of a light touch rather than sort of then you can argue that it really is just expressing your view, let's say in the on the board there, and seeing if you get a similar upvote, downvote, that sort of stuff, or just really everybody expressing their view about that idea. That's a sort of light touch, and you can move forward that way. If you want to go down to the formal voting idea, yeah, that's more process vision. It's certainly not light touched there.
Yeah.
And voting can rankle some people as well, because they may be really passionate on their particular idea, and suddenly, yeah, you force a vote, and you've got 4 people, you've got 3 people say nah. That really upset it. So it's just a question of, do you really want to formalize that sort of idea?
Yeah, I mean, and that's why I put a card here for just
especially
like
on a small organization. As the organization grows, yes, you may have to start thinking along those lines. But for the moment, you've got a core team.
Yeah, but of course, I mean, when it comes to like this consensus creation, like I also put like proposals and like just having some clearly defined decision making model of how do we even come to how do we come to a decision? What are the factors that we consider as part of that decision, right? For example, if we think of part like a factor being how does this affect the user being part of the decision-making model and having that be part that's centric, or does this decision make things less or more transparent, tying into that. Or if we look at our other core value of independence and having a decision-making model is like, does this decision negatively or positively impact the independence of the organization and the project, that sort of thing. So I think maybe having some sort of model in terms of how we decide is worth having a discussion on.
I think proposals is a good one to go with as sort of a baseline, because ultimately I think we want to foster the idea of being able to put your ideas forward in a sort of constructive way, and having people say what works and what doesn't. And then I think ideally, at least for me, we shouldn't really need a formalized voting process, except in circumstances where there's a deadlock, where some people want a feature or a fix or whatever, and some people don't, and no one's budging on it.
Yeah, I mean, and we've already like utilized voting in sort of a cheeky manner, which was like, where do we put or is like how do we do the log out, log like shut down, that kind of stuff in the new Budgie menu, right? It was just like, all right, let's have a quick vote, see where everybody's idea is, and then that way we're not like wasting time bike shedding on things. And
right.
But so I think like in that way it's kind of lighthearted, right?
Yeah, and that's the light touch way of working, and that's how it should be.
Yeah, no, I agree. As opposed to like at least my understanding, I haven't been a part of this, but my understanding based on from what I've seen like in the news regarding Debian and stuff, and just general experience in the Linux community, is like it seems like Debian has a very complex voting system that can sometimes introduce fragmentation, as an example, like with systemd stuff, or it'll cause bike shedding for years regarding particular decisions. And I feel like voting in our case is not something where we should spend 6 months trying to petition for a certain thing to happen, right? It's just when there is that deadlock, like Sarah mentioned. Yeah, all right, Sarah, is there any other ideas for consensus creation? Or if you have ideas that center around some of these topics, like say decision-making models or proposals, like how would we do proposals? Is there a certain framework that we should follow for proposals? Should we create one so people have like a template as an example for proposals that they could follow, that everybody has an understanding of? With surveys, you know, is this like internal surveys, external ones, so on?
In chat, Winnie Linux asks, should there be a hierarchy of core developers, contributors, and users in voting or not? I think that'd be a good thing to consider, because if we go with the deadlock route, well, who does it affect?
Mm-hmm.
So I think who it affects would probably have a say in the process too.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I think like a decision-making model around the proposal itself is also worth having, because a vote does, like, we don't have to think of it as a binary yes and no either, right? We could also be like, hey, I like this certain aspect of what you're proposing. However, you know, this one aspect is sort of antithetical to our value of being, you know, transparent, or is antithetical to the user. So we need to have a discussion point around that. So
I guess the big thing also is whose voice matters more, or do they matter more? Developers and core contributors and users.
yeah, I mean, I'd like to live in a world where the user has the equal opinion, but I also live in reality, and
the ultimate decision has to be the core contributors.
yes,
but the core contributors should be actually talking to end stakeholders, end clients, whatever you want to term the phrase.
Yeah.
I'm going to avoid the word users. At the end of the day, so from my angle, yes, I work within a particular distro. I may be the team lead on that one. So my focus is obviously key to that, and I understand from where my user base is.
Yeah.
Whereas some of the other core contributors may not be deeply involved with their particular current choice of distro there. So their viewpoint may be just the looking at the way they use the desktop itself, rather than looking from a wider angle. So
yep.
At the end of the day, it should be just core contributors should be seeking consensus with others.
There's also the fact that, unfortunately, core contributors are probably the only ones who really understand the technical aspects of the decisions, like splitting out window grouping, or the non-window grouping option from icon task list, because it was such a pain to maintain, but also trying to split out that functionality somewhere else so that we're supporting both use cases. Where to an outside observer, it might seem like we're removing an option, but we're really trying to still support everything while making a technical decision to make it easier on ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's always worth keeping in mind that a user isn't going to have a full context behind. I mean, they might have a great idea, like, you know, let's reintroduce window workspace cubes, right? And it's, if you think about it from the technical perspective, that's, and also from the perspective of like, does this introduce a broader value? And when you consider the individuals which would need to be the ones to contribute this code and maintain it in the long term, like, does this provide a sufficient amount of value to actually warrant even discussing this or something, you know? Okay, so we have stuff around proposals and surveys and decision-making models. We have some ranked voting and hierarchy point-based voting, which I feel like, so at least my personal concern, I'm not really sure who wrote that, but I'll just say, like, my personal concern with that is it might create this impression to the end user that they don't matter, because like if we were to be down in the weeds, like I have 5 votes and the user has 1 vote, they might be like, well, why would I ever even bother when clearly you could just be anti my idea and something never happens, because the clear cut technical perspective is you have more votes than I do. So, but, you know, if we want to have a discussion around some of these cards, we can.
Just to explain a bit more about the experimentation one, because it's not very clear for me too, so not sure if it is for him. I think it kind of joined the proposal, but in a bit more concrete way. Like sometime when you do proposal, you come to have 2 or 3 good ideas, and you are not sure which one you want to implement. So I think we might want to jump the bridge sometime and do experimental features, so features that will have behind the feature flag. And at the end, it's like the user will help us refine this feature, and will kind of obtain the consensus at the end by having that. Like if we see that all the users just toggle this feature, for example, or everyone is happy with that, and yeah, that might be hard, but we might create consensus sometime by just presenting some solution and discarding them if they are not good enough.
Yeah.
That could be arguable for a future vision, if you want to call it a Budgie 11 idea, that you got this sort of real everything is potentially a plugin, and can you mix and match things there? So you got the absolute core part of it, which is minimal, rather than just hiding things over on feature flags. There, so you just pick the particular plugins that you particularly wanted to make up your experience.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Especially when we consider the fact that there will probably be like the separation between data and presentation, where like you could have a plugin that's just, I don't know, like make my dock look like Plank instead of, you know, whatever the current dock design is or something. And that's a presentation layer aspect, or it could be something far more technical, you know, like if Ubuntu Budgie wanted to do like window shuffling instead of whatever we were to design or develop for Budgie 11, then, you know, that's a plugin that could be enabled by default in that certain flavor of operating system that ships Budgie. At least from my perspective, I think having some sort of framework for proposals would be a good idea, because that way everybody has a clear-cut sort of template on here are the things that you should consider. So this ties into decision-making models of like, make sure that what you're proposing considers, you know, the user, how we actually operate and develop, say, Budgie 11 or Budgie 10, you know, so a technical consideration, transparency, and so on. And I think
it's worth putting proposals in. And
because,
yeah, like you said, formalized proposals would be a good idea too.
And then surveys could also be a part of that too. And in a way, surveying, actually, if you think about it, you don't even necessarily need to have a formalized point-based hierarchy like voting system. If you're
surveying is part of proposals in many ways. How did you arrive at proposals? You must
exactly
have got that idea from something there. It's not.
Yeah, you must have had some sort of data that is backing up your viewpoint, surely. And if you don't, then that actually needs to be part of the proposal process.
Yeah.
Is having a survey, and in a way that then informs you, without necessarily having explicit voting, what users believe, or the user point of view, or even developer point of view if you're surveying developers on it, and then that informs your decision going forward. So I feel like if we were to stakeholders, sorry.
There we go.
There. Okay, so if we were to like think about this, have like, could have connection line, so you would have maybe a survey would tie into, let me delete that. a survey, which would tie into a proposal. And that sort of ties into a decision-making model. I mean, they kind of go hand in hand. And then you could do something like if there is, no, you could do is there deadlock, right? So is there a deadlock in the proposal and the decision-making process? We do. I'll just pick a sticky note. It's not ideal to use sticky notes for this, but yes. No. We move this voting over here. I'm also like sort of doing it in terms of the actual flow. So it'd be like, we have a past here. Just say action there. No pass, bit of fail. We'll have action. We'll have. This isn't the prettiest graph, but it's only temporary. And instead of, we'll have discard. So the idea would be, is there a deadlock regarding the vote? No, there isn't deadlock. Okay, well in that case, it just immediately goes into action. Is there a vote? No pass.
I don't think you should ever discard things. I think you should just basically put it back into the pool ideas, because eventually you may come around to there's a sufficient number of things that are very, very similar that you produce a proposal out of it. So you should never discard is a
Maybe a strong way.
A strong way of doing it.
Maybe just go back to surveying.
Right back around.
So we could do something like, so no pass, add to pool, or survey. I don't know why it made that arc that big.
Oh, that's an arrow.
Something like that. Whatever. Looks gnarly, but this is temporary. All right, passed. Goes in here. Then that goes into action. So, and we could always like figure out what the decision-making model is, but I think at least what I've gathered from individuals, and actually really this could, because the surveying really, when you think about it, is like also public discussions, sort of ties into that, right? And then
Just be public throughout the whole process, right? So your survey should be public, obviously. Your proposal should be something that's presented where people can see it and give feedback. The voting should absolutely include all of our stakeholders, right? So I think the whole process will be public.
yeah. So you start out with probably like, so you have an idea, you survey based on that idea, you get the data that supports or does not support, in which case you probably discard that idea or add it to a pool of ideas for the future. But you know, if the data supports your proposal, you make one, you tie that into our decision-making models. You know, how does that actually affect? And that's part of the proposal process. Sort of we actually, this voting technically should be here. These cards got mixed up, but guess a decision, basically a discussion point. Is there deadlock? Yes, we vote. Doesn't pass, okay, well then we add it back to the survey, or we add it back to the pool or survey. If there isn't any deadlock or the vote did pass, then we put that plan into action. Does that seem sensible to everybody, or should we use these little bubbles? I mean, these were here just in case. It doesn't. We don't necessarily have to use any of these, but
No, I like this process. I think this works. I don't foresee us actually having to vote particularly often.
No, I don't either.
It's nice to have this process in case we do run into issues like that.
You just really have to base it on sort of current decisions or current way we pursue things on Matrix really there, because most of the sort of discussion points are relatively small. There could be what's the wording of this little box that I'm creating. That's that sort of stuff there. So you don't need a full engagement model as you've got on the screen to do that sort of stuff really.
Yeah, that's true.
Your proposal, if it's deemed small by the person or the people that you're talking to, can go straight from proposal into an action really, as long as you pass that with your fellow contributor.
Yeah, I mean, and this is something that we could like sort of plan out, is like how these two cards, decision making models and proposals, really fit together, because you could have like a proposal template that has a very structured decision making model, but also it's sort of a way of thinking, a mindset of like, okay, is what I'm about to like ask people, like if this button should be moved, right? Like having the mindset of, is that going to mess up the stakeholder or something, you know, the individual, or like, okay, this functionality I'm going to remove. If we think of the stakeholder being like an operating system, are they leveraging that in ways that aren't understood? You know, like that sort of line of thinking and that mindset, that approach they sort of go hand in hand, and then presenting that idea, whether that's in Matrix as a discussion or you know, some formalized proposal or something. So is there anything that like really missing out here, or should we have like a second track here for like decision making models?
You can go from that decision making model straight to action there as a sort of a dotted line or something like that, effectively.
Yeah, you know,
it depends on the degree of the thing that you're currently discussing.
Yeah, that's a good way to do that. I wish it wouldn't make such an aggressive march there, but you know. All right.
It just cuts the idea that I've got this couple of hours to burn. Shall I crack on and change this piece of text on
exactly
I'm creating, rather than go through a full formal thing that may take a week or two to do.
No, that's a good idea. I think this probably provides us a really good visual for how it.
As I said, at the end of the day, if everybody's open and honest the way they approach things, then great. Then
yeah. Well, and also like the whole idea of being transparent is also just making sure everybody has as much data as they can to make informed decisions, and also like from the perspective of retrospectives, of looking back on past decisions and saying, okay, what was the data that, or the decision making that was involved in this, you know, like why did this action or this proposal occur? So that way a user might be like, oh, you removed, you know, this button, you know, or sorry, this stakeholder said you removed this button. That's really dumb. Why'd you do that? You could be like, here's sort of the decision and the thought process behind it.
Yeah, well, that can be done as part of the process that you want to follow. Then you may want to discuss this tomorrow. By the way, I can't make it tomorrow because it's my wedding anniversary. But
wow,
yeah,
congrats!
So it's the way you want to work. So if everybody, rather than and you can hide this in GitHub if you want to. So everything that you do has to be an issue and a PR that you make, and at that point you can justify anything there, and you got immediate track back on that.
Yeah.
Whereas if one person decides today, well, I think my thing is so minor, I'm just going to throw it into master, that might make without any real decision, unless you look at the commit message, it may cause a little bit of angst later on if you realize that change has caused all sorts of unknown havoc.
Yeah. And this is something that's also worth considering in terms of, like you had mentioned, requiring issues or PRs or that sort of thing. And that's good. I'm just wondering if there would be maybe some concern in terms of that slowing down our capability or process to rapidly iterate on Budgie. And of course we could, say like starkly, like, oh, well, the development of Budgie 10 hasn't been particularly fast, so it's not something we really need to worry about. But as we, move forward, whether that's with more Budgie 10 stuff or, with Budgie 11 and going into the future, my hope, of course, is that we would be able to more rapidly iterate on Budgie. And
yeah, I wouldn't say it should slow anything down really, because at the end of the day, if you're on Matrix there and you just pop up and say, what do you think about this, guys? And somebody says, yeah, that's a great idea, crack on at that point. If it's deemed between the two of you, that is relatively trivial. When we're all intelligent individuals here, so we can collectively say, yeah, that thing is going to be potentially quite a big thing to do.
Yeah,
and we may discuss that further. So
yeah. Somebody in my chat is joking around that in terms of decision making and voting, that maybe a content creator or influencer should get more points. And I would probably not approve of that.
it's not a bad idea, but let's move on.
Yes. All right. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do is delete like this. Let me unlock this box. I have to long press to unlock it. Okay, I'm gonna delete it. In theory, if it will let me delete it. Thank you. And I'm gonna hopefully move all this over here. I accidentally deleted the agreed thing, but I think we're all smart people. We kind of know what the process probably should be. But okay. So this obviously isn't a final form, but it gives us a clear path that I think we all agree on in terms of what we should be aware of and things to improve. And obviously this will tie into how we communicate information about the org and all that, and communication about, well, like documentation of what our process is. So could always expand on that later. But let's go ahead and go to code of conduct, which is the lengthy one. We don't have to go over it word by word. However, there is a link up at the top here that you should be able to press on it, and then it presents you another link, and that should open up a view only thing. And let me know if it doesn't, and hopefully
I don't have access at least.
Oh, why? I click share with others. Oh, hold on. That's why. Let me. It was my fault. No, I want everybody with a link to be able to view it.
There we go. Okay, I can see it.
Okay, good.
I can see it now.
Good. All right, I'm gonna delete this. Here, no. Oh no. Oh. Delete this. Oh, we'll just have this. So let me go ahead and I'm going to switch my. I have to stop presenting in order to then present a new tab, which then is the code of conduct. Share it. Should share. I'm mostly doing this for the Google Meet stuff, so for the recording. Okay, so we have a code of conduct here that's quite lengthy, so we don't need to go over all of it. I would also like to mention that when I wrote this code of conduct, I was inspired by the Django code of conduct, which stipulates having an independent committee effectively that would investigate code of conduct issues. Now, I don't think that's necessary at this point in time, given the scale of our organization, and also given the fact that the team is much larger, and obviously I would like to make sure that we all have authorities or the authority to actually sort of enact any conduct changes or that sort of thing, or ensure that behavior is corrected. But this code of conduct also really just tries to boil down to what is expected of everybody when it comes to how they conduct themselves, and how they communicate things with others. So you might see some irrelevant things like, for example, matrix IRC here really could just be replaced with matrix because, well, we don't use IRC because we live in the 21st century, and something has replaced it that is far better. So, but you could see some of the inspiration I took, which is the contributor covenant, which, you know, has some, like, I know it's quite a controversial thing that not everybody agrees to, but that doesn't mean there aren't elements of that which are worth utilizing. So I took some inspiration from that, from the code of conduct enforcement and reporting guidelines from the Django project, as well as the existing contributor guidelines that we had at the time when I was at Solus. I don't know what they have at this point, but yeah. So the premise. Go ahead.
Have you, Josh, actually looked at the Ubuntu code of conduct?
I haven't. We could actually take a look at that.
Should I just pop that? Where can I pop that? So
you could also share it. Share your screen or share a tab if you want. But you could also post it in the, you could post a link to it in the.
Let me just post a link and you can share it if you deem it there. Let's just put it in the development forum for you.
Sure.
There we go.
Okay.
And it is a really slimmed down way of thinking. It's human centric in many ways, rather than a scary thing. Talk about violations and such.
Yeah. And that was more like how do we implement conduct changes. I won't really get into the history of why that part is there. It's not really something I'm interested in delving into. But there was a line of thinking in terms of why that should be there. But yeah, so I'm sharing this at the moment. I'll zoom in for the sake of the stream. So we had this Ubuntu Code of Conduct version 2.0, and please let me know in chat if you guys could read that. So they say Ubuntu is about showing humanity to one another. The word itself captures the spirit of being human. So I'm not going to read all of this, but in essence, yeah, code of conduct governs how we behave in public and private, whenever the project will be judged by our actions. Yeah, so it's always important to know that, I mean, and obviously there's always going to be special cases that don't frankly need to be covered by a code of conduct, but the premise is when you are engaging in project activities, whether that's physical or virtual events or your day-to-day operations, or you're representing the project, how do you actually operate as a human being? So it says, we strive to be considerate, be respectful, take responsibility for our words and our actions. So our work will be used by other people, and we in turn will depend on the work of others. Any decision we take will affect users and colleagues, and we should consider them when making decisions. So yes, I agree wholeheartedly with that. Disagreement is no excuse for poor manners. We work together to resolve conflict, assume good intentions, and do our best to act in an empathetic fashion. We don't allow frustration to turn into a personal attack. A community where people feel uncomfortable or threatened is not a productive one. And I completely agree with this. And I really approach this from the manner of ensuring that at least the code of conduct promotes constructive discussions and actions, rather than trying to boil things down to, you know, oh, I have XYZ expertise and therefore my decision is more valid than yours, or like sort of this sort of language and behavior that diminishes the capabilities diminishes the being of another individual. So I completely agree with the idea that we should always operate in a manner that is empathetic or empathic, I guess is how it's actually said, but I butcher English all the time. So but you know,
American.
it's I was gonna say it's American English, so yeah, just obvious. Take responsibility for our words and our actions. So we can all make mistakes. When we do, we take responsibility for them. If someone has been harmed or offended, we listen carefully and respectfully, and we work to right the wrong. Be collaborative. So I'm not going to read all of this, but the essence is, you know, collaboration reduces redundancy and improves the quality of our work. Yes, obviously. And I think this is something where it's sort of implied by our core values to be collaborative and be open and transparent. So it says we prefer to work transparency and involve interested parties as early as possible. Yes, this is something that is really part of our decision-making model, or should be part of our decision-making model for Budgie as well, is you know, not wait until the 11th hour to involve somebody in a decision, but involve them from the start or as soon as you possibly can. So
Yeah, Twitch ad.
So you have this value decisiveness, clarity, consensus. So disagreements, social and technical, are normal, but we do not allow them to persist and fester, leaving others uncertain of agreed directions. We expect participants in the project to resolve disagreements constructively. When they cannot, we escalate the matter to structures with designated leaders to arbitrate and provide clarity and direction. Yeah, I agree with that. So ask for help. Yeah, I think that's useful. Obviously, I would, based on experience, also would like to emphasize that when we are engaging with others or each other, that we don't assume a baseline of knowledge. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to always, like, quote unquote, mansplain something, or assume that somebody doesn't have a certain technical knowledge, but try to bear in mind that, you know, if like there's a newcomer that they haven't been around for years, so they might not understand the decision process that went into a particular decision or anything of that sort. So, and step down considerately. When someone leaves or disengages from the project, we ask that they do so in a way that minimizes disruption to the project. Yes.
That's a particularly important one for many reasons, and I'm sure folks around here know that too well. Yes.
I don't think that one needs to be elaborated on, and I, quite frankly, I mean, obviously, yes, when like stepping down, it should be done in a manner that isn't disruptive and rude in that sort of manner. However, from a technical perspective, in terms of minimizing disruptions, I want to ensure that's basically non-existent to begin with when it comes to how we operate the project and delegation. And actually, that's something that's actually discussed here is delegation. So it's nice that that's touched on. So leadership, authority, responsibility.
That sort of stuff is Ubuntu specific, so you probably can skip that particular part.
Yeah, yeah. Responsibility for the project starts with the benevolent dictator. So I would,
yeah,
and this is something we'll get into, but I would like to see myself as a BDFL role, but that's like from the perspective of not like trying to squash discussions or behavior, or what I mean is squash discussions or like proposals or that sort of thing. But like if somebody comes in and starts trying to like fundamentally change us to be like a mobile desktop or something and be entirely touch centric, right? I have the ability or it's my responsibility to ensure that we stick to the sort of our core values And we could do that as a community. So like not like that BDFL role doesn't really.
That's the sort of thing why I'm particularly keen to see the idea and foster the idea of core contributors really collaborating and working together.
Yeah.
Whereas that particular phrase there comes with the Shuttleworth idea of top down shall make decisions. That
Yeah.
doesn't foster in terms
No.
of a real independent type project there.
Yeah, and
So
I also
Ju-
like think about it from
just be careful on the way we word and think and think
Yeah.
about things. Yeah.
I mean, I could also think of it from the perspective like the whole BDFL or whatever is. It's more being like not even benevolent dictator, but rather like somebody that is like a spokesperson for the project. So you know,
Yeah.
the individual where if somebody wants to invite an individual onto the podcast, this one is like fully capable of doing so. But like that gets into a lot of nuance that we could delve into later. But because quite frankly, like I don't want to represent like Ubuntu Budgie stuff, right? Like that doesn't make any sense either. So, because we have you for that. So figuring out the roles and responsibilities is something we'll delve into. But yeah, this is definitely quite a few things about that are Ubuntu
As I said,
specific. So
when you get into the leadership, authority, and responsibility being
Yeah,
part of it, is that's I don't think we should need to go down there. But the top part of it is
Yeah.
from my viewpoint, is something what everybody's really been talking about already,
Yeah.
and that's just those words there just really sort of distill it down to something that is easier and understandable to read about.
It does. Whereas like mine, I feel like gets into a lot more of the nuance in terms of language and harassment, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Where it's like really it's when you want to promote engagement, and I'll go ahead and reshare this other tab here. Share tab. And we go code of conduct. And this is like, again, like we could just not adopt this and just come up with something different. I'm perfectly happy with that. Coming up with something where it really instills sort of, I guess, what we're trying to captivate and what Ubuntu captivates a lot as well. So, harassment, obviously, it's not welcome. And any sort of behavior that's offensive or it demeans an individual or threatens him, based on really any factor, is absolutely not acceptable. I feel like we're all adults, and I guess I would be hesitant to use the word normal human beings, because I think anybody that works on open source is there's something different in their head, but the premise.
We all have a different way of thinking, shall we?
Yes.
Leave it at that, shall we?
Yes.
Different perspectives, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the idea, of course, is that harassment, whether in public or private, is not acceptable. And if it happens within the community, then it's something that needs to be brought up and reported, and we make sure that's handled appropriately as well. Then when it comes to language, we talk about, or I talk about in this, that you shouldn't use language which is hateful, derogatory, degrading, or causes emotional or mental distress. So whether that's like provocative language, so non-constructive language that might cause an individual emotional or mental distress, should be avoided, of course. And then language which is hateful or towards an individual or a group, whether that's gender or disabilities, religion, so on and so forth, and that should all be avoided. I can't say I think there's only been a couple instances when I've seen this sort of behavior and language used, and even then there was like community guidelines that very clearly stated not to use that language. So you could debate that this doesn't really need to be here, because it might happen so rarely. But sometimes it's at least felt in my view when I used to do solo stuff that sometimes you would have to throw the rule book at somebody, be like, no, this you might think that there's nothing wrong with this, but here's this one particular section where you could say, this is where your behavior is not conducive to what we're trying to foster here within the community. And of course, we have media sharing, which I don't really think we need to have a section on this. This could probably be nuked, where it just says, don't share anything that's illegal or offensive, or, I won't get into it. I don't think we really need to worry about that when it comes to Budgie Desktop and Buddies of Budgie. I think the worst thing we probably would have seen is a really bad setup with the GDK theme. That you would have to wonder how somebody ever used something like that. But
well, each to their own. Some people have got some really weird ideas of what their desktop wants to look
yeah,
like.
yeah, I've been on certain subreddits where
yeah, they want to do that one. Then fair enough.
Yeah, exactly. And then of course we have a big section here that's very wordy, that basically boils down to the promotion of constructive engagement, discussion, and being mindful that people work on this on a voluntary basis, that we should be respectful of their time, their viewpoints, their opinions, their expertise, or their lack thereof of expertise, and making sure that we're not diminishing each other, engage in discussion. So that's kind of what this boils down to. I'm not sure if we want to go through this. It's very wordy.
In many ways, what you've got there is very, very. I'm sure a lot of code of conducts are very, very similar, and what we've just discussed there on the Ubuntu side there, from a headline point of view, it covers the same sort of areas there. So it's just a degree of how much detail you want.
Well, how much we want.
Yeah, I would say, at least for me personally, I prefer the Ubuntu style of code of conduct, where instead of just being a rule book to throw at people, it's a human-centered set of guidelines for people to be able to look at and very easily read and comprehend, instead of the sort of like I'm not saying that this obviously isn't the only example of it. There's plenty of them. But that sort of really long, like terms of service style code of conduct that realistically not many people are actually going to read and understand.
No, and I agree with that. It's also worth, as I've said a few times, when it came to this code of conduct, it came from, I guess, a different perspective and view on other circumstances in a different project, and those aren't necessarily relevant or translate over to Buddies of Budgie or other open source projects for that matter. So, but this was just sort of something that I already had that we could sort of go through and say, okay, are there certain points? But yeah, I mean, the Ubuntu one also was quite good. So I don't know.
I know why this. I do know why this exists, and I will not delve into that. But I think this is, at the very least, a good starting point for what we eventually want our code of conduct to be, which I would like to see something that is closer to the Ubuntu one.
Yeah,
with the spirit of this one.
I would agree with that, like using almost the Ubuntu one in terms of how it lays things out as a framework or a foundation to build on, rather than trying to take this and distill it down. I feel like it would be better to work on top of theirs or whatever, and then sort of come to a determination in terms of what. And actually, if I go back to like the workshop template, we have all these different topics that really I think we could consider removing all these individual columns and tables and just focusing on what aspects do we want to communicate in our code of conduct, or what is important to us individually that we feel should be communicated and why. So my wife posted in Twitch chat that I have a tendency to write things in very lawyer talk, which is absolutely true. So do bear that one in mind as well. Yeah.
Meanwhile, the code of conduct in most places that I run, at least like this community Discord servers for my school, is well, I'll avoid using harsh language and just say, "Don't be mean." That's like that's the rules channel in most of the Discord servers I'm in.
Yeah, and then we start. Go ahead.
The very opposite approach. But yeah, that's all I had to say. What's happening?
I was just going to mention that there's this reporting conduct section as well, which I feel like we should have some framework to ensure that people are able to privately bring their concerns about conduct to individuals and have some sort of mechanism for that. I'm not sure how we want to do that, and I'm certainly open to ideas. What I had, this was almost lifted verbatim from Django, so do keep this in mind. And it seems like it kind of broke some of the copy pasta as well when I had converted it from my PDF. But basically, one way would be like you email somebody in, like, say, the Buddies of Budgie team, you know, like the quote unquote best buds, whatever, and then they could work on resolving those issues. You know, in case it's a matter where you're not comfortable bringing it up to the individual engaged in that conduct. So at least it's something that's important to me. But how we would implement something like this is obviously up to discussion. And I feel like a code of conduct committee is sort of completely overkill for this, and it's based on sort of a different line of thinking and a different team structure that does not exist within Buddies of Budgie. So yeah, we had this reporting person.
I think
go ahead.
Something I think is important is that we're always able to look at our policies critically and, you know, able to take feedback on them and implement changes, and that we're not ever just going to take a document and say this is the final version of this, right? And then we're able to take and implement feedback on policies. And so I think that's something that we'll build on this as we go. Right?
Yeah.
So like it should be a living document.
Absolutely.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anything that's like written down policy should be a living document.
Yep. I would agree with that. We have this reporting procedure, which I feel like we could summarize this in terms of just boiling it down to, okay, if somebody would report a code of conduct issue, like, how do we handle that, and within what time frame? Of course, we have these impact guidelines. Whether or not we need this, I guess, is up for discussion. So I would appreciate if we do have a discussion on this. But basically, it's like some behavior obviously warrants a stronger implementation of correction, or you could say consequence, or a warning, or some form. And others might be like, okay, let's work on correcting this behavior so it doesn't happen again, or it's less likely to happen in the future. Is this something that we would like to go over at the moment, or?
That's too much detail for the discussion there, but yeah, from a headline perspective, I think I like that phrase. Don't be mean. If you put that in your mind, yeah, it's a great one actually from a code of conduct point of view.
Yeah, it really is. Just like don't be mean.
Yeah.
And then of course, like, we have this and this resignations thing. I feel like the whole step down considerably is like something that this basically boils down to. This is the more wordy version of that. And this comes from a different place, so I feel like this could be scrapped entirely. But David, I'm glad you actually shared the Ubuntu code of conduct one, because I feel like that provides a better foundation.
I think what you've got a lot of detailed processes behind that, and that's fair enough, and that you can see you got something formal that you can follow if and when things come to that. But in many ways, a light touch view of a code of conduct is something should hopefully make sure that we don't actually ever need to use a formalized code of conduct, a formalized way of doing things as you've been presented there. But it's good to have in the background there, where where we have to formalize things if things does go disastrously wrong.
So are we thinking of like a hybrid approach, almost of having like, I guess a rule book? Well, not a rule book, maybe just a framework for those that need to handle code of conduct issues that they're able to follow, or like what's our line of thinking here, you think?
Yeah. So if when I do encourage people to go just to have a reread in their own time in the Ubuntu Code of Conduct, because a lot of the detailed stuff that you've already described there is part of that
Exactly.
section there that we didn't really cover, which is the team's responsibility and the hierarchy. That sort of thing there is probably where we as a smaller organization might want to sort of tidy up and think of the best way that we want to work together on such like there.
Yeah. So where was that in the because I know I skimmed over it.
So scroll back up again. So where we got where we started going into the leadership aspects of it, okay,
right?
And then it follows down there of how things are conducted and where disputes are done and done, community councils and such like that. That isn't really applicable to what we want to do.
It isn't.
Okay, so that's why I said take the top part, and the bottom part there is really for our organization, for us to actually come to a real decision on how we deal with code of conduct issues itself.
And this isn't something, let me go ahead and actually, I'm gonna go back to the mural. I really dislike the fact I have to stop presenting, then re-present. Kind of frustrating, but okay. So if we look at the mural board, in my opinion, all of these boards here really, like, I feel like we could probably ignore and maybe just use the sticky notes to sort of lay out a guiding principle on what aspects we think should be covered. Does that sound reasonable instead? Like if I was to remove these, and we have similar to what we had before, which is sort of like these idea pools. Do you understand, or did I just ramble on and not make any sense?
Sorry, it's a little small on the screens to see what you're doing.
Oh yeah, sorry. I wasn't sure if you had it open or not. So the idea I was thinking was if we just ignore all this section about like analysis of the code of conduct that I had in the document, but instead we just use these sticky notes as sort of like as a way of gathering our thoughts and ideas on what we would consider important, and then also sort of I'm going to go ahead and go back to this. I will go ahead and link this here because it's a good it's a good reference point. So like for me, constructive, if I could write correctly, constructive discussions is really important. So making sure we don't get, and it's easier said than done, of course, especially if we're super passionate about something, but you know, not becoming emotional about certain things. And obviously I'm not proposing we all turn into Vulcans and, you know, everything has to be super logical and thought out and ignore the human perspective, but just maintaining some form of constructive behavior is good. And then when it comes to so you say don't be mean, and I think that's a good one. I feel like part of that is also like oh thanks. So I would say non-hateful. I'm sure there's a better word for that language. Be welcoming of all perspectives. Actually, no, that's a really good one. Let me add a card that I think would complement that one is in addition to perspectives, we would have be aware individual backgrounds. Upbringing, culture, so I feel like this sort of ties into perspective. Continuous code of conduct review and feedback is really good. So if we were to take a look at the Ubuntu one here, which isn't going to show up on Meet because I switched tabs, but actually, you know what? It's going to be easier if I just share the whole window. Share a window and then share. Okay, there we go. All right, so we have this code of conduct here from them. So be considerate. We have something along those lines. Actually, I'm going to something tile these two windows. This off to the side here. There we go. Be respectful. It definitely falls under don't be mean. Which is a really good encompassing way. And then be collaborative is a good one. And I would say and consider our core values.
Yeah, so the non-hateful language is the take responsibility for our words and actions. That's effectively what you're trying to say there. So.
Yeah, that is. Oh. In B4, basically, our code of conduct is the Ubuntu. To some degree. So this value, decisiveness, clarity, consensus, I mean, this is sort of baked into our core values, which is part here. Be collaborative and consider our core values, because transparency in our consensus model and that sort of thing, and how we create consensus, sort of just part of this.
Yeah, great.
So I'm not really sure it warrants necessarily being two separate line items. A step down considerably. I mean, yes. What do we feel that needs to be part of the code of conduct, though? Like, I mean, because
it does, and you cover that in great detail on the other code of conduct.
Yeah.
In an open source project, you can only give the amount of time that you've got available, and some
Yeah.
people life changes.
That's true.
And your code of conduct is there really just to help you. So your life means that you can't spend any more
Yeah.
time or a little time. So yeah, that's important in terms of stepping down.
So maybe some. Let's see. Promote. I will correct that typo as well. Gracefully hand off. I'll just say that. Good. Always get into the nuance of that later. But the idea, so the reason why I wrote it this way of like promoting shared responsibilities is this will sort of tie into, I guess, how we really think about things from the perspective of what parts of the Buddies of Budgie org are kind of quote unquote responsible. So like having micro teams where one is responsible for like packaging and one's responsible for like the day-to-day like DevOpsy side of things and documentation and community engagement, that sort of stuff, and making sure that we promote that sort of sense of shared responsibility and not necessarily always promoting the idea of a singular individual having responsibility for something. You know, we could sort of break that down into like, okay, well, technically, you know, David would be responsible for like Debian packaging. I would be responsible for like Fedora, and hopefully Sarah Bit will at some point be responsible for our Arch, I would hope. One day, cross my fingers. And
Desperately
then,
need somebody in that area. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
apparently, I looked into it a little while ago, and apparently you can only maintain a package in Arch if you're a trusted contributor, which sounds like the sort of you can only get the job if you have experience, but there's no way to get experience without a job sort of thing. But that warrants more looking into. And for the record, they have
Yeah.
triaged some of the issues that I've brought forth about
okay.
packages not being up to date with their metadata and Budgie Control Center not being in the repos. So hopefully that'll be forthcoming.
Yeah, and this is like sort of nuanced stuff. So like, yes, there will be instances where individually we'll have responsibility, but making sure that collectively we understand who has responsibility for what, and trying to promote sort of an open-ended way of encouraging others to take on that responsibility as well. And especially in the event that, you know, your life changes and you feel like you need to step away, or, you know, you have a disagreement on the way things work, and in that case, making sure that you gracefully hand off your responsibility and depart the project or what have you. But so we have avoid assuming malice is a good one. Yes, I like that. Promote cooling off periods is a really good one too. Yep, I agree with that. Because like it's okay to admit, okay, I'm a little emotional about this. Let me step away and like feel like, if anything, that like shows a certain level of maturity to recognize and have that level of introspection. Where like, okay, I need to step away from this, and either think about it objectively or come back to it later, and, you know, commit to doing that with the individual. So avoid turning disagreements into public disputes. Sometimes easier said than done, yes, but generally that's a good thing to avoid. Yep. Be civil is a good part. Yeah. Of course, the reason why I say that that's easier said than done is open source is obviously quite controversial from the philosophical perspective, and as we all know, and the viewpoints of other projects, and sometimes those sorts of disagreements can actually bubble over publicly, or you might have some content creator or influencer that might have a certain way of looking at it. So I think these provide a good guiding principle so far.
Anything we want to have like a zero tolerance policy for? Do we want to talk about that?
Yeah. I guess how do we quantify, like, well, I guess this sort of goes into the niche of what actions do we perform when there are, I guess, no tolerance language that's used as an example. And this is something that we could discuss, or you know, take a look at my code of conduct and what I wrote for how we actually implement sort of these consequences or corrections for certain behavior. But I would say, like, hateful language, of course, this kind of falls into like dopamine. And, you know, actually, I think what I'll do is, if you don't mind, I'm going to sort of copy paste this, and hopefully go to the right tab and make a sticky note here, which is, oh, well, very tiny text. Let's not have that be centered, please. Go. It didn't correctly apply the formatting, but I feel like this is a good baseline that we could work off of. So sort of behavior that's derogatory towards a certain class of individuals is absolutely unacceptable. You know, we want to make sure that, and I feel like there's a card somewhere. Yeah, be welcoming of all perspectives and like backgrounds and upbringing, culture. I feel like actually identity it would be a good one to have here as well. Identity. Where, you know, if somebody identifies as a particular gender, or, you know, they have a certain sexual orientation, or they have a certain like race or nationality that, you know, are not engaging in behavior. And I feel like we're all, at least those of us here in this workshop, are all mature individuals that are able to respect one another for our differences, and also recognize that our differences are actually, in a way, our strengths. But I guess what would you like to see in terms of like just like line in the sand, zero tolerance for a certain language or behavior sort of thing?
I don't know that I had any specific ideas. It's just something that I think we need to think about.
Yeah.
Remember, this is an area that could be a whole session in itself.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, and I don't want to spend.
I think you've got a sufficient number of ideas.
Yeah.
Big boxes, small boxes there, Jim. We can delve.
Probably move on from this.
Yeah, it could be worth just doing another workshop specifically to kind of create the code of conduct. But we do have a lot of other stuff to get to.
Yeah, we certainly do. So
if we're going to pursue the idea of that being a live document, that needs to be available somewhere, like maybe on GitHub, or maybe you make the doc public for reviewing and stuff like that. People can leave
Could be in the site source repo in theory.
Yeah, it could be in a lot of places. It just needs to be somewhere that everybody can leave their comments. Right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is something we'll get into, I think, with this whole next discussion. How convenient that we're tying into it. So good segue is, how do we actually facilitate discussions, and what avenues should we facilitate discussions through? For example, actually, I'll go ahead and make a couple sticky notes here of what we kind of already have. Oh, I didn't actually mean to do that. Copy. If my copy pasta does. Okay, I don't know what Vivaldi is doing, but there we go. Okay, copy pasta is hard. Who would have thought? So go have a card here. Oh, somebody already beat me to it because my copy pasta failed, which was GitHub issues and discussions. So thank you, Sarabit, for writing that one. Yeah. So we already have, I think this is sort of something we could dive into, is, you know, like collaboration being a good topic. And I think Miro is sort of well, actually, and give me your thoughts. Like, what do you think about this Miro like whiteboard so far? In terms of like how we're using it. And
it's an interesting tool. It does facilitate ideas there. It sort of makes it easy there. But yeah,
I think it's pretty good for this purpose.
Yeah.
I've never used it before this, but it seemed like it has pretty much everything I would personally want from.
Yeah, and this isn't even like, wait until you see all the add-ons that you could install for it as well. Like this is all very simple stuff, and technically you could even do video calling through it. Anyways, so I'll go ahead and add that as just an idea. It's kind of hard to scale up because it's a paid service as well. So, you know, you can't just like quickly have an entire team unless you pay out of the butt for it. So somebody put Matrix, which is a good one. Yep. I'm gonna go ahead and put this here. I don't think it is necessarily, but it's just an idea that we could talk about. So,
so there needs to be a page on the website or something that has links to lots of the different places that we use, because it looks like we're going to have communication all over the place just based on what's popping up here.
Well, I mean, these are just ideas. They're not necessarily all the things we are currently using. Just ideas people currently have on what we can use, or in some instances, like with GitHub issues, what we're already using. So
Yeah. I mean, let me write that down.
We got everything there is where we can gather stuff from, because obviously we're all over the not we're all over the place, but we interact in very different ways. But if we're looking for a central place that we want to distill any conversation, it has to be in one place. And the one thing that we're all using is GitHub at the end of the day. So
yeah, that's what we use. I feel like would probably be sufficient for. Actually, let me go ahead and figure out the GitHub work.
I think centrally we would be using Matrix and GitHub. So like Matrix and GitHub primarily, but everything else is a sort of. I mean, like Twitter and Mastodon would be a good place to solicit feedback from the community, and Reddit would be a good place to gather feedback because people are going to make their feedback heard on Reddit.
So I went ahead and
like it or not.
I went ahead and put this link here.
Never found Reddit to be constructive of anything really. But,
it's really not. But I mean, if you want opinions.
Oh, indeed, yes.
Good place to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I went ahead and also posted a link to the fact that GitHub in April introduced organization discussions and polling. So this is definitely something that is worth considering as well, is like a process for having an org-wide discussion place where we could also have the surveys be conducted there too. And we're kind of already doing that with the existing discussions thing, which is like this whole goes back to, and I say it a lot, but transparency, right? And actually promoting the sort of sense of openness and also being complete polar opposite of what Budgie was historically. But promoting sort of discussions around.
Like in the cards that we have here, there is really two kind of cards. Like the place where we want the discussion to happen, and the place where we only post links to ensure discoverability we organize a pool to collect some opinions, so to achieve consensus. Like for example, Reddit and Twitter Mastodon are not really to discuss. They are
They're
social
more
platform. There is
promotion.
rarely constructive stuff happening here.
Yeah.
So we just want to bring people in the place where the discussion should happen and where we can centralize and easily moderate.
Yeah.
So I guess what we would want is say GitHub issues and discussions and Matrix for actual discussions of issues and of features and different things like that, and then we would use Reddit and Twitter and Mastodon and all those things to get sort of solicit ideas from other people outside of the community or people in the community who want to provide their own feedback, but not necessarily for our own internal discussions on those things.
We use those sort of social media things really just to advertise the fact that we've got something really to discuss. But obviously people don't all use GitHub, so it's a matter of posting it and then trawling through the garbage. Should we say garbage? Idea. The idea is being raised.
Yes, and by ideas being raised, that means sometimes people posting XYZ distribution bad, good other distribution very good, to completely.
I saw that on, I don't remember if it was Twitter or Mastodon, but like on the status notifier thing, someone was like Solus good. I don't like Solus good, Arch bad or something like.
It was Solus bad, Magero good kind of. Yeah,
that was it. Yeah, like well, the funny thing is that video was actually taken on Endeavor, so.
Yeah, it was
Sorry,
kind of. Yeah, it was kind of a whole silly thing. Yeah, I mean, so like Twitter, when it comes to that, like, well, social media in general, I feel like it's not necessarily a good way of surveying constructive information, right? Because it doesn't really necessarily promote in-depth discussions and thoughts.
Yeah,
it promotes quips and snarky remarks.
Not that I think we should ignore it, because there are people
No, of course not.
amazingly who do use Twitter and Reddit, and
mean-
especially like Mastodon I've found to be pretty nice, but there are people who do have genuinely good ideas that will put their ideas forth. It's just
No,
there's a
I mean,
lot of garbage to draw through.
If I wanted to ignore it, it wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
To be fair, I'm not going to be the one looking at them because I don't have the mental fortitude to browse Twitter.
fair enough. Yeah.
So all on you guys.
So we have a lot of good things here. So maybe let's go through them from the perspective of how do we facilitate discussions? So what sort of mechanisms we have? So we have one here, which is like Twitter. I feel like is so somebody's organizing into feedback. And for some of this, I don't feel like in the case of Reddit, at least my personal opinion. So within the stakeholder feedback, like I don't believe we need to have our own subreddit. I feel like budgie development and all of that and engagement is kind of spread across a wide variety of communities, which is good. And sort of Reddit, like I don't feel like there's a lot of value add to us having our own subreddit, but promoting the idea of acknowledging feedback through posts to like God forbid r/Linux or
you can,
or other.
You won't be insulted by just posting a GitHub link. They removed automod and banned the moderator that did that.
Yeah, thankfully he's gone. So it should be a slightly nicer place now. Not that I'm going to use it.
So I would like to note, not having our own subreddit kind of makes us look a little bit like a bad guy in some other subreddits, because then they end up getting lots of feedback for Budgie that isn't necessarily relevant to their core stuff, right? Whatever they're doing. So like the Solus project subreddit gets a ton of feedback about Budgie.
Well, I feel like that's also worth keeping in mind the historical context, which was Solus was Solus, like they were the people developing it, and by Solus it was like, well, I guess quite a few people in this channel or in this workshop, were or in the case of like Evan Yeager, and I'm not sure, Julian, if you end up switching to Void, but like at one or two people in this workshop are current Solus users, and then in the case of like Sarah and myself, are former Solus users or had leadership roles. So like there's historical context there, which is why there's a lot of discussions there that happen. But I feel like in those cases where there are issues in specific subreddits, that could typically be solved by having like an auto mod rule, right? Where if somebody posts something about Budgie, then that auto mod would post like, hey, we noticed you posted something about Budgie. Here are the appropriate places to provide your feedback. At least that's my perspective on it as somebody that's like managed the Solus subreddit as well in the past.
I think it's also worth noting that this doesn't necessarily exclude anyone from making a Budgie subreddit if they really wanted to. Like, it's not like the community, if they wanted a Budgie subreddit, couldn't make one. It's just not going to be something that we're going to pursue.
Yeah, and maybe David could also provide some perspective on this as well, because as far as I'm aware, do you guys currently have an active subreddit? Because my understanding was like you created one, but then you shifted over to using the forums, more or less.
So when the distro was Budgie Remix at the time, we had a specific subreddit for that, and that was pretty active at that time. But you remember, this is the days when we had sort of Google Plus. Remember that? And Reddit as well as the key things there. But when we became official, somebody decided to nick Ubuntu Budgie, and then they decided to kick me off it by me virtually being the team lead. So and then it sort of became a subreddit that nobody really used because there was no real feedback behind it. So Reddit's an interesting thing in that area. I wouldn't recommend it for anything other than sort of trying to advertise things and just to be able to make aware of things and stepping in if necessary and trying to guide people when they're going completely nuts.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I kind of
Well,
look at it from that perspective as well, as it sort of being this platform similar to Fostodon um, and Twitter, where it's kind of used more for like advertisement purposes in a lot of ways.
From my end, the majority of the feedback I get is from our discourse forum and looking across our official channels. So we've got Ask Ubuntu and ubuntuforums.org.
Mhm.
So across those three, that's where the majority of Budgie users, if they are seeking for feedback and issues and having that sort of thing, that's where they go to. But
Yeah.
it's the silent majority, shall we say, that it's very difficult to engage.
Yeah, and I mean, there's always going to be that challenge of you're going to have a certain part of their user base that either doesn't want to use a particular service for any particular reason, or they're just simply also not interested. They don't have a need to do that, and that's also perfectly fine too. But for those that are interested, really need to consider what are the best ways of engaging in meaningful discussion, and as opposed to these short quips online. And I think we all have like a sort of a good consensus. And thank you to whomever it was that's been organizing these. I don't know if that was Julianne or Marcus or like who it was, but
A bit of a
yeah.
team effort.
Yeah, it was a bit of a team effort.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's really good. So stakeholder feedback and advertisement. So we have Twitter and Fostodon, which we already have, and we'll get into. There's another panel over here, which is resource access and service ideas, about how we actually ensure that people have access to these when they want. We have Reddit, so I think we just had a discussion on that. Baked into the platform. So does somebody actually want to talk about this? Whose ever idea this was?
I created the card. My idea was that Budgie users are on Budgie, so if we want to not bring new users, but just inform all users that there is some kind of decision affecting them that is taking place somewhere, maybe the best platform to communicate that to them is just to use Budgie. Like they can opt off the whole thing, but the idea would be to have that pop off when they start the desktop, just informing them that there is something happening.
And this is something that Ubuntu Budgie does really well with their Budgie welcome. So I feel like we should definitely consider having something, maybe not in Budgie 10. I don't know. I guess it depends on the mental bandwidth and whether or not we feel like it's valuable to invest the time in that Budgie compared to Budgie 11. But having something that's agnostic, that also other consumers of Budgie can incorporate their consumer specific channels into, as an example.
I mean, that might be a pretty simple way to just start playing around with EFL and see how that works out. See if you can build yourself a quick EFL app.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Maybe
I would like to note on the Discord front, at least. Josh has already seen. I'm kind of already doing this in some circles where people will ask me, like in the server for gaming on Linux, I'm pretty active there, and people will come to me and ask me questions about Budgie.
Yeah.
And it's essentially just a community outreach thing at this point, rather than the idea of having our own Discord server. We would just if we have a presence there, it's worth answering questions that people might have or soliciting feedback if we need it.
Yeah, and I'm there too, but it's mostly to tease Liam and just reply to stuff when I happen to actually check it. So, but you're definitely more there than I am. So, yeah, I mean, my personal opinion is that we shouldn't have a Discord server because that is going to fragment text-based communication, and I'm not really sure that there's enough value add for Discord beyond that. For example, with like screen sharing and like video and voice discussions, like technically we could already do that through matrix calls or doing what we do now, which is these workshops. So obviously
go ahead.
No, go.
Okay, so I pretty much see Discord and Matrix as just about interchangeable.
Yeah.
So if we're gonna, they're not total feature parity, right? But Matrix pretty much does everything that we need, what we could need in a Discord server.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be nice if one day we have like voice channels, right? And with push to talk and all that. I'm really hoping one day we have that. But that's like the only thing I actually, well, okay, not the only thing I miss from Discord. I also like the stickers and emojis and custom emojis, and I would really like that in Matrix. But anyway,
I mostly like that the Discord app works, as it's supposed to.
yeah.
Always use a different Matrix client.
Yeah. Anyway.
So then we have development discussions. So we have the Buddies of Budgie Matrix and GitHub issues and discussion. So in a lot of ways, with our current Buddies of Budgie server, this also applies to, I guess, broader, so general discussions as well. So you have like support and like just off-topic stuff and screenshots and like that sort of chit chatter that can happen. And of course, like we have to contend with the fact that like we don't want to try to cannibalize the channels of other consumers like Ubuntu Budgie and Solus and like Gecko Linux and so on and so forth. But making sure we have something that is agnostic for everybody is certainly important. And I feel like our Matrix does a good job with that at the moment. And of course, if there's like other channels we need to open up, we could do that. But I feel like at the moment with our current volume, the 4 that we have now are pretty good. And then when it comes to GitHub issues and discussions, given the fact that we can also do polling in theory with GitHub, I feel like that's probably the best way to do surveys as well, where we could link to a particular discussion piece that has our line of thinking and a proposal and all that and consensus and be able to survey individuals there directly. And we're already kind of doing that through the discussions. So if I go over to GitHub, if I could see github.com, if I could spell it Buddies Budgie, I'll just go to 10.6 here because it's bookmarked. And I go over discussions. The first things I wanted to do when I created the org was create this discussion area with like topics like making Budgie 10 fly again. So this is already kind of surveying and soliciting feedback from developers and users alike. Like, hey, what are the pain points? And here are the things I've identified that I feel are pain points, and making sure that there's sort of this living area that people can provide feedback. And in my personal opinion, this has been a good foundation for things. What are your opinions?
Yeah, we collected a lot of good feedbacks there.
I think the only thing to really consider with regard to that would be that because I think it is a good idea to centralize surveys in one spot rather than having like a survey on Fosstodon, a survey on Twitter, and a survey on Reddit or wherever we choose to do it. But I guess the issue would be participation, because I feel like we'd probably get more, just due to the nature of laziness, we would probably get more participation from a single Twitter poll than we would from linking to a survey from all 3 of those platforms. However, I don't think that should necessarily mean that we should only do it on Twitter or should only do it on Mastodon. I think this is probably the best way to go. It's just something to think about.
Or something that this will tie into the next thing of like, maybe there's a way of doing surveys and polls, like for instance with Google Forms through the official like Buddies of Budgie GitHub, or the Buddies of Budgie like Google Workspace, of soliciting feedback that way, and then copy pasting that data or however we want to share it onto social networks and GitHub and that sort of thing. Yeah, how do we consider feedback from audiences on multiple platforms? That's a good question.
Trying to document what we're talking through.
Yeah. And of course, I think for collaboration, Miro is probably the best way of doing this sort of whiteboarding. It's not cheap per user. So I wouldn't necessarily encourage that like every single one of us has an account that we're paying for within this team, as an example, but that we create these boards when we feel it's like absolutely necessary. And I could always work with people on setting stuff up there too. And it's also worth keeping in mind that when necessary, like I did today, we could invoice that to the Open Collective and get reimbursed for that. So if we have any other ideas on sort of real-time collaboration, that's certainly worth having.
So one thing we haven't talked about on here is the forum sticky note. Is that something we want to pursue? Do we want to have a Solus forum?
Well, Solus already has a forum.
Oh, yeah.
But in terms of Buddies of Budgie, on the other hand, I feel like our discussions and GitHub issues and all that is probably sufficient. And for sort of like real-time communication, Matrix is perfectly fine for that. I put forums there just so it's something that we can discuss and possibly entertain or think about the pros and cons in terms of what are the pros in having it and what are the cons in having a dedicated forum. So
David, you probably have the most experience working with you've got what, 3 forums you work with for Ubuntu? So that might be, do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah, so as I said, majority of users go to our discourse forum by virtue that's the first thing that they see in the menu. It's there's front and central as the first link, so that's where people go to. And also, obviously, if they're coming from Ubuntu itself, then people tend to congregate on the 2 official forums, so Ubuntu forums and Ask Ubuntu. So it's really straightforward for Ubuntu users to where to contact people and how to solicit ideas.
Yeah. I feel like in our case, forums are probably not necessary and would just end up fragmenting discussions even more, because then they're happening over GitHub issues, pull requests, and GitHub discussions and Matrix. Having another platform might not be necessary when that could be formulated into a discussion, which could also have these long forum pieces where you have something that might not fit into a few instant messages.
So if we're going to concentrate on 2 areas there, we've already got it on that picture there. We've got the Matrix and we've got the GitHub stuff, and it's really for us as part of the core team really to where we usually focus our and look at from end users' point of view, of sort of taking that information, sort of trying to distill it and then feeding that back into Matrix and GitHub itself. I tend to find it's very difficult to encourage people to actually say and go and file this issue in GitHub. People just don't want to do that.
So I'm putting this one here, which is the Google Workspace that we already have for Buddies of Budgie that I set up for like email and for document sharing and that sort of stuff, and obviously for this Google Meet for real-time communication. I don't feel like it's something that users need to really deal with, but it's just sort of good, as you can see here, for us having like a workshop, having that sort of discussion, and it doesn't mean that we can't introduce people that aren't on like the Best Buds team or what have you, because like Marcus as an example, like you're here and you're not part of like that team, so but for like Google Workspace apps, we already have like Google Docs and Google Presentations, Google Drive, that sort of stuff, where we could use that to store stuff before it ends up getting like converted to a format that works better for like the website. So, and then of course down here we do have the central source, so the Buddies of Budgie website, like again, Vault page. So it's worth keeping in mind we are going to have a documentation center. This is something that we could get into with the how to be organized this information, which is on the far right hand side. where, you know, we could organize stuff through documentation center and of course presenting the data on the flagship website, which is in development. But some aspects of it, like how do we identify organization, what are our core values, all that, like that'll be communicated on like the about page. But I feel like this is sort of a good idea. I think we've kind of come to a consensus here in terms of like, I think we're all pretty happy with Matrix and GitHub. And then for our stakeholders, I feel like we're like in terms of soliciting feedback, we're pretty happy with the idea of social media being used for the typical advertisement. And in the case of this baked into the platform, I think this is actually a pretty good one in terms of maybe actually. So, David, what's the current Budgie welcome that Ubuntu Budgie has? What's that written in? Is that written in like Vala, or is that written in like Python? Or
Yeah, it's a Python WebKit mix basically. So it's
okay,
it's a Python mix backend, but it's basically HTML, CSS type pages effectively that
Okay.
you display and interact with.
gotcha. I'm just wondering if, and this is something that we could discuss going forward as well, the possibility of having some sort of dedicated app that fires up the first time you use Budgie, regardless of what operating system you're on, that points to like dedicated support for Budgie, you know, like the Buddies of Budgie stuff, as well as like the consumer specific ones like Ubuntu Budgie. If that's something you're...
That's fair enough. But remember, people tend to, without something in there that they could interact with, people will just see as the first log on and never go back to it. So it has to have something value add on a particular distro there to encourage people to keep going back.
Yeah, that's something that could certainly be a discussion point at some point down the...
And the idea was not just to have that like the first time you start your distribution that it pops. It was really like when we publish a new proposal and the person didn't toggle off the functionality, we have that pop off.
Okay. Right. So like if we announce a new survey, having a mechanism where it then communicates that to the user, like, hey, here's a new... I mean, if we would have to have mechanisms in place to ensure that, you know, it's not just some random person creating some sort of controversial thing in the GitHub discussions that is then sent out to all the user base. But, you know, but yeah, that's a good idea. I think we should probably move on to the next one, which is the service ideas and resource access. So there's a few things we're already using at the moment, and I'll dive into what those are and why we're using them, and then a couple of topics or problems that I've already identified and some solutions I've looked into to solving those problems. So the first one that we use is DigitalOcean. So DigitalOcean, in case there are people watching this like on YouTube or what have you, DigitalOcean is a cloud provider that offers sort of application platforms and managed Kubernetes clusters, which is like for orchestration, and like virtual private servers for hosting websites and WordPress and whatever you want, really. So I use DigitalOcean for the managed Kubernetes cluster. So the reason for this is I have experience in the consultancy business at this point, using both the Amazon Kubernetes service, or EKS, I believe is what it's referred to, as well as the Google Cloud Platform managed Kubernetes service as well. And while those are great solutions, they also cost a lot of money. And DigitalOcean does not. So I use that because it's inexpensive. We're not made of money. And up until I started filing it with the Open Collective, this was something that was coming out of my pocket. So I wanted to make sure that I had the maximum amount of flexibility as possible. And the reason why I'm using Kubernetes is because I'm really taking an approach to scaling our infrastructure. So the idea would be the website is something that we have a dedicated pipeline for, where we make a commit, we tag a release, a Docker image is built, it gets pushed to Kubernetes, it gets deployed. Or, if we put out Budgie 11 as an example, and like all of the universe decides to flock to the website, we're able to scale up instead of, the servers going down, like that sort of stuff. So that's why we use Managed Kubernetes. We also use Google Workspace at the moment. So I set this up to ensure that we will have a place where I could add other people if we desire, and they could have their own, Buddies of Budgie email address, access to documents, email, sort of collaboration stuff, and of course the entire Google Workspace suite of applications that they have. So I used it here for email, document management, more. It's not expensive, industry standard. And if we ever switch to Google Cloud Platform, I could tie in our Google Workspace into their identity and access management system. So you could just log in with that Google account and we could assign roles. So that's why those are in use at the moment. And
yeah, I have no issues with that, especially with DigitalOcean. I need to say that they're a key sponsor to us. So anyway, so we get all our infrastructure side events sorted out by DigitalOcean.
Nice. So those are the two things we're already using. So I only had that I only had that there to sort of provide some transparency. And if anybody had some objections to that, then that's would be something worth noting. But I feel like we're all quite pragmatic here, and understand the use cases for both of them. So another topic a couple topics that I was thinking about was social media management and password sharing. So for services where we only want to have one account, we need to have a good way of doing password sharing so everybody can log in, see all those passwords, get access to that. And
so the way we handle it on Ubuntu Budgie is that we've got a private GitHub repo with just the key people has access to that.
Mm-hmm.
So it is pretty well locked down in that manner.
Yeah. And then social media management, which is, I think that goes without saying what that is. And then services to solve these given problems. So for social media management, like logging in and being able to post something and not necessarily have to have direct access to those social media accounts like Twitter and Fosstodon. Well, I don't think Fosstodon's technically supported by Buffer, but in the case of like Twitter, it is. So that's an option. It's not like the only option, but it's the most popular one that is reasonably priced. And then for password sharing, at work, we use 1Password. So I have experience with that. However, 1Password is not cheap. However, Bitwarden is quite affordable. It's $3 per user. And what that allows us to do is, add credentials for any services where it might not be reasonable to like use a dedicated solution. Like, for example, Buffer, just given the price involved, if we just need to log in and post something, or, log in through our accounts. And the nice thing about these managed password solutions is they have a lot of value add, like the ability to change the passwords, or they'll keep track to make sure that if the password was leaked, you get notified about it, and also provides some nice functionality in terms of being able to quickly provide access to new individuals, as well as revoke access to individuals. Say like somebody is departing the project, and you can revoke the access to that. So these were some solutions that I came up with. But of course, if we have any ideas on topics or problems in terms of resources and access, then please put that, if you have ideas here, in this topics and problems, and ideas or ways to solve it down here. I'm gonna go ahead and open up the Bitwarden website.
I think for social media management, the question is really who want to have access to that.
Right.
Because like I'm not sure anybody would want access to that. I sure don't want.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm perfectly happy with Twitter. And of course, as Sarabit knows, I have the tendency to also reshare people's stuff really quickly, and also sometimes get excited, and I may unintentionally misinterpret some people's remarks and cross-post that to other social media. My bad, Sarabit. Anyways. So I try to do a good job there. I've been doing that for years. You know, I was doing that before, like when I was originally communications lead for Solus Project, right? So
For context, it was just a matter of I wasn't sure if the feature I was working on was going to be making it into the very next release, and I was deliberately vague about it. And Josh kind of jumped the gun a little bit.
Yeah,
I interpreted my next release, or future release, as it's definitely going to be in Budgie 10.7,
yes.
and then posted that to Twitter. So
yes,
we talked about it though.
Yeah,
so
that wasn't. Yeah, that wasn't intentional, and I wasn't trying to put Sarabit in a tight spot. I was just. I interpreted an upcoming release as like the upcoming release. So
yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah.
So we have this like a bitword in here. I think I'm sharing my entire screen. Let me know if I'm not. But here we have a Teams organization, which is $3 per month. And we don't have to come to a concrete decision on this going forward. And obviously we don't need to adopt anything until we actually need to adopt it. Like we have a use case for it. But I just wanted to go through here and mention that like it has user groups and audit logs and API access and some premium features like FIDO and YubiKey support and Vault Health, so like the health of your passwords, that sort of thing. And also they're quite friendly to the open source community and FOSS in general. So that's also another reason why I kind of chose them. So, but it's just an idea. So let's see. Let's scroll up. So nobody has any other topics or problems. Okay, that's good to know, because I do know one, which is infrastructure.
Yeah, because right now you hold the keys to pretty much everything.
Yes, and that is actually not even intentional. So I put infrastructure down here, or here, I mean. So the solution to this, I'll have a little card down here, is digital, if I could spell that right, Digital Ocean Teams. However, true story, when you create a project on one team and you decide, hey, this is like, say, for example, my quote unquote personal team, that's the default, and I wanted to move it to a new Buddies of Budgie team, you cannot do that. You have to destroy your entire infrastructure and then move it over to the other team and recreate it. Fortunately, I was smart and everything's in Terraform in IAC and all of that. So that's not too troublesome, but yes, that's a problem I already identified with me holding the keys to the kingdom when it comes to the infrastructure. And I do not want to do that. I want to have all the domain stuff accessible as well. So actually, let me go ahead and post infrastructure here and domains. So let me, because for some context, for those who aren't aware, there was a time when in the history of Solus, the individual that was formerly leading the project did not fully hand off everything related to the project. And we had to scramble to basically change all of our infrastructure and change our domain. And that was not a smooth process. And I want to completely avoid that for Budgie. So
that's an example of where you needed a code of conduct way back when.
And
how to step down gracefully.
Well, I'm not entirely sure the individual had originally intended. I won't get into the history of that, but I'm not entirely.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure that a code of conduct would have fixed that. But yeah.
There's also the issue of the GitHub org in that you are currently the only admin, I think. So if you like what happened with Solus, where that individual was the sole owner of the organization and was the only one with the admin privileges in order to change owners of it, where essentially Solus, if for those unaware, Solus could not recover the Solus project organization on GitHub and had to move to a separate org just to be able to create new repositories and update everything.
Yeah, let me double check.
Maybe we should have like an admin account that would be in the Bitwarden vault, for example, and then in case of issue, we can just connect to this account and take over the organization in case you leave or something happened to you.
Yeah, so the way we handle it in Ubuntu Budgie is that we've got 2 administrators, and the whole access to GitHub is 2FA, just to make sure. So at least there is another person that can take over if need be. At any particular time, so there isn't a bus factor there, and that's basically what we've got all over the place. There, we've got at least 2, if not more, key people that can access key parts.
I like the approach that you proposed, Julian. That, but I actually also want to see. I want to double check our teams because I do wonder if there's a way. Teams. Yes, buds. I don't think I'm sharing any super secretive here. Actually, yeah, I mean, I think the approach for having a singular account that has the admin access would be.
I wonder if that's against GitHub's terms of service to make an inactive account and give it admin privileges. Probably not.
I'm not sure because in enterprise you have a lot of services accounts that are used by companies, and for example for CI/CD or just for fallback when you need really to pull the trigger. So I'm not sure.
Okay.
But let's go ahead and actually write that down, assuming somebody.
You have to have trusted users. That's what we use all the time in our day-to-day business. By its very, very nature. So no, I wouldn't go with an account that nobody actually doesn't realize, because that's one central attack point, and effectively you need to have trusted users, but the number of trusted users needs to be limited.
Yeah. David, if you want to maybe work with me on like making sure that well, basically what I'm saying is if you could walk me through making sure that's all set up correctly and that you guys have access, I feel like that's a problem that could be solved quite quickly.
It is pretty straightforward, yeah. It's just something that we were well versed in how to do, and that's what we practice.
What's the process for Matrix? Like, can multiple users have admin access for creating Matrix rooms for a given space, or is that something that only one user can have? I mean, I imagine at least for support, like if, Josh, if you got hit by a bus and we couldn't change any of the Matrix settings, I feel like it should be easy enough to contact someone to get that all resolved if we could show them an obituary.
It does look like I'm able to provide people admin capabilities. Or at least it shows it in the organization. So actually, you know what? I could actually do that literally. And for I'll even be a little crazy, even though actually I'm only sharing one window, so only Twitch is gonna see this. Super exclusive for Twitch. But I'm gonna go to FOSS Freedom, click admin. I click Cerebit, click admin.
I would like to note that, how did you say it's pronounced, Campbell?
Cerebit.
Cerebit.
Yeah. Ebenjager is now admin. And let me see where NHV posted the last time. We're gonna have to double check this.
I didn't post in a few weeks at this point, I think.
Okay, let me let's do this. NHV. One of these days you'll have there we go. See, admin changed. Okay, easy, already solved. You don't have to worry
Perfect.
about that.
Perfect.
Guys,
Now, is that just for that one channel though? Is that for the entire
I-
space?
that's a good question. I hope it's for the entire space. I feel like like if I go over to if I click on Eben Yeager in general channel, no, it then goes back to
Yeah,
default there.
It's just for the one channel. Yeah.
So
Mhm.
annoying.
I also don't know if there's a different permissions model for the space.
Well, this is something we can look into after the.
Yeah.
But we
I
at
think
least
you
have
can
an.
do that at each channel level because you have the list of users there too.
Okay. So that's. Are
What,
there any
less
other
than 5
topics?
minutes left?
Yeah. Let's actually quickly move on to how do we organize this information? Okay, so this is what I already have down here. So website ideas. So we have roadmaps. This is something I want. I want transparency in what we're planning on developing and not being afraid to change the roadmap either, right? It's okay if things don't work out to plan, or we get a brand new COVID variant for the 500th time that's super deadly and creates zombies, and we all have to lock ourselves in the house, and that creates like it's okay that we could shift things based on changes in our environment, world, and all that. But I do want roadmaps, so it gives people an idea of what at least we would want to work on. Documentation center. This is something we could discuss in terms of. So my idea was to have one that's sort of self-created, but if there's an open source one that's not like wiki in nature necessarily, but something that could tie easily into CI, CD, like GitHub sort of stuff, then we should pursue that. But my idea was to have like the Budgie site and then have like a Budgie doc site, and then they both would be like Next.js and React and with Markdown, so MDX. But this is something we could discuss as well.
Just one thing we need to take care since the get-go, I think, to avoid fragmentation is ensure that it can be translated easily, especially the documentation center, because we had this issue with Solus.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. That it's actually. Oh, I didn't mean to copy that. There we go.
And for the documentation center, do you mean something like the current Solus Help Center?
No, I mean something
No.
like hold on, let me actually pull it up.
We are nearing time, by the way.
Yeah.
You got 1 minute actually.
I've one limit to. Okay, basically, if you check like the HashiCorp stuff, like their API developer documentation, you could see kind of the idea behind that. So having a broader breakdown of things that are both user and developer centric. We have the about page. So basically, how do we organize this information? Have documentation about the team. So team and responsibilities. And I'm afraid, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to that part. So this might have to go into a day 2 workshop. But teams and responsibilities. Which if I'll pretend that's spelled correctly. It isn't. Okay. But we're technically over time now. So although technically my Twitch stream is reporting 2 hours and 58 minutes. So if we want to go by my Twitch thing, we have a minute and a half.
Well, I got to step out now. I'm
I've got to step
running
out as
late for
well.
another appointment.
Yeah,
So
this
thanks, Josh, for organising this. Much appreciated.
Yeah. Yeah.
I won't be able to attend tomorrow's for obvious reasons. So have fun. But I'll be on Matrix anyway to have a discussion if need be.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining. We'll have a second one where we'll try to break down some of the structure for the organizations and the like. And then we could always schedule the third workshop and future workshops for this. So yeah, thank you for being very insightful, and I appreciate you taking the time out.
Cheers, guys. Have a great
Yeah.
one.
Take
Thanks,
care.
guys. Bye.
See most of you tomorrow.
Right.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Hey, let me switch cameras. This is weird. Just end the call. Okay. Well, I would say that turned out quite well. What does everyone think? We hit the 3-hour time gate. Yeah, I'm glad people were like, no, we're stopping. We're stopping at this 3 hours. We weren't able to cover everything, but I think it was good. I think there's a lot of good discussions, a lot of good viewpoints from people. I'm really glad that we were introduced to a new code of conduct as well, or at least I haven't been exposed to. So getting some insights on that. And if I go back to this and look at the workshop, sort of getting a bird's eye view of this. Oh, I just realized. I think I ended the call. Hopefully it actually recorded the thing. Or like it was recording, but hopefully it actually ended the recording. Guess we'll find out. Yeah. Okay. Oh, we'll know in like 24 hours when it's supposed to pop up. So we have day one. So we have, let's see. So we identified this more or less. We created that. That is in progress. This is more or less decided. This is what's in progress. Brainstorming resource access. This is sort of in progress, and org structure is still to do. Now we have some of these, which is finalize initial structure, redeploy infra, set up any agreed services, so that sort of stuff. So tomorrow we're going to go ahead and have our day 2, which will be probably remnants of this, and then Budgie 10 and 11 development topics as well. So I haven't created a board for it, so we'll see how that goes. I might just end up renaming this to workshop day 1 and 2 and figuring something out. But yeah, that's going to be it for today. Assuming Google Meet actually ended the recording and saved it like it should have when I ended the Google Meet. I should get something in the Google Drive in 24 hours, and assuming nothing went wrong, it should be up on the Buddies of Budgie YouTube channel. Follow us on social media if you aren't already, and I will be posting it there as well as on our matrix. Win8 Link says won't be able to participate in day 2 workshop, unfortunately, so it's good that I was able to join in. Yeah, thank you as well to all of you on Twitch that have posted your feedback there. I have been reading it. I just haven't always had the opportunity to actually incorporate your feedback without like derailing the conversation or interrupting people. I was trying to be respectful of people's time in the workshop as well. When you had mentioned some people would be concerned about needing a Google account to participate in polls and surveys, and I agree. Fortunately, we came to I think a consensus to potentially use GitHub for that. But I think you're always going to have issues no matter what with individuals not being comfortable with certain services. As an example, if we were to use GitHub for that, if I go back to this, where was it? Here we go. Like some people might not have a GitHub account, and be anti-GitHub or something. So it's worth thinking about that. There's just like, you kind of got to appeal to the masses and just be like, okay, well, where are we as well as developers? So yeah, thank you again, everybody. And I will see you tomorrow at the same time. I don't know what time it is. I think it's 3 to 6 p.m. UTC. So, but you could check the Buddies of Budgie blog, the state of the Budgie 2022. There's details there. So that's going to be it from me today. Thank you everyone that participated, and I hope you have a good one. So, goodbye.